welcome everybody because we need to get started. I'm Mike McGill. I am the board president at Central Contra Costa Sanitary District. I may not look like the board president right now, but I am. So thank you for all coming out. And Central San's general manager just arrived. So Roger, can you stand back up please and kind of wave? No, you notice Roger is wearing the appropriate recycled water color shirt.
That's not the color of recycled water.
No, it's what is the color of water? And then there's kind of a Central San booth over on my left, your right. It's got a big round recycled water insignia on the table. There are purple grocery bags that are for promoting recycled water. Please pick one up. And that's also where the cover crop seed is. So if you want to pick up your pound, just wander over there and pick up your pound. Carolyn, you're going to do the introductions of individuals. We still have people coming in, so she's helping sign people in, and she's grabbing the program. I am going to be your last speaker. We're late enough that I've done a little bit with recycled water. I won't let us go past our close time, so I may abbreviate my recycled water talk. But we do give away recycled water to our people that live in our service area, or Concord, or Clayton, all of San Ramon, Martinez, even if you're in Mount View Sanitary. 300 gallons per trip. You can make as many trips as you want in a day. There's a very, very, very short training program that our state permit requires us to go through, and you will get a sticker to put on your containers. And then you can just keep coming and getting the water. We're open now Monday through Friday. I believe it's 8 to 5. And then Saturday from, I believe, 9 to 4. We're beginning to shorten our hours because the days are getting shorter and hopefully cooler. And maybe we'll get some rain. I keep watching our website to see if those hours change. Because as it begins to rain, which we're all hoping it will, we won't need to be giving as much away. Carolyn Finney is the executive director and president of Aglantis. Aglantis, and Carolyn is here on my right. Aglantis is the nonprofit that has created this CoCo San Sustainable Farm. She has, and her group, attained a 10-year lease from Central Contra Costa Sanitary District for 15 acres of the land. That's half the site you see right here. And there's a big recycled water line that runs along the far edge of the cars over on my left, and we're going to be providing recycled water from that site. And Carolyn, would you like to introduce people on for the program?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. And tell me if I'm talking too loud or too soft, which just perfect? Okay. So I am the president of Atlantis. 5 years ago, Mike McGill told a group that I was in that they were discharging at that time between 50 and 200 million gallons of water that could be recycled and reclaimed, and they were discharging it into Suisun Bay. And I said, with all that free water, too bad you don't have any free land. Well, boy, does he wish he hadn't opened his mouth, and so does Roger, because now it took a long time to get the lease, but the board finally approved to give us this land for $1 a year to grow salads for schools and the food bank. And the food bank is right over there, half a mile away. They'll pick up and distribute the food using existing systems. The water is high in nitrogen and phosphorus. Some people, like Chuck, are talking about how beautiful their roses are because he's using the recycled water. We also, sorry, I lost my train of thought. So we cut down the carbon footprint of food by being close, by being local, by using local transportation, by using non-fossil fuel-based fertilizers. And of course, we're using recycled water that'd otherwise be thrown away. We didn't know there was going to be a drought back then. Soon you will see something here. Agritech in Pittsburgh donated an approximately $100,000 greenhouse to us. It's 144 by 42 feet. We would fit in a tiny little corner of it. It's so huge. That'll be sitting here. And Tesoro paid to ship it up here. It was in Texas. And so lots of good things have happened. I want to thank our event sponsors really quickly, PG&E Republic Services, who donated that huge pile of compost, 35 yards of compost, which we'll be hearing a lot about today. Nana Dicta Graves, where's Nana Dicta? Oh, there you are. Okay, Nana Dicta is our resident artist. She teaches African dance. Her artwork is amazing, and she did our staging. And Showtime Electric, Rob Kingsbury did all of the sound, and Central San did some of the flyers for us to advertise, and is themselves donating a lot of seed over there. So make sure you go home with some seed, and those bags over there are free. The one on our table is a donation of $15, please. So if you happen to have picked one up and thought it was free, please go pay. All right, thank you so much, and I'm going to introduce our speakers now. We have a great program today. Our first speaker is Rex Dufour. Obviously, this doesn't say anything. I'm going to let him introduce himself from AATRA. We are part of a Berkeley grant that basically is training young farmers in Central and Northern California. Rex comes to us as part of that grant. Then we have our Matt Powers, who has written a book on permaculture. I'll bet you, how many people are here because of permaculture? Oh yeah, that's what I thought. That's why I got him here. I figured that's how I get people to turn out. And we're getting a food truck in just a few minutes. They're stuck in traffic. They're on the curriculum here. Okay, there they are. Bethallyn Black teaches at DVC. She is the vice president of Atlantis. She's a master gardener for life. If I could follow somebody around 24 hours a day and listen to them, it would be Bethallyn. She's fascinating. Mike McGill already introduced himself, and Andrew Sutherland is here, and he is a statewide expert on integrated pest management. And that's it. I'm done. And Rex, will you tell them a little bit about your background? Because I know you've worked internationally in soils, and I think it's important for them to know about your background.
Okay. Thank you very much, Carolyn. I really appreciate you inviting me here to speak to these folks. My background is actually in bugs, and that's what my shirt is about. But in learning about controlling bugs, I started working with a bunch of organic growers, and they were always talking about how they didn't have as many pest problems as the conventional growers, and they were rambling on about soils, on and on and on about soils. So I thought I had to learn more about soils, and that was over 20 years ago, and I've educated myself on soils. I worked in as a Peace Corps volunteer for a couple years in Thailand at a plant protection unit, then worked along the Thai-Cambodian border with a development project under the United Nations Border Relief Operation, and then I spent 3 years in Laos managing a development project way out in the boondocks in northeastern Laos. So, and then I came back to the U.S. and got a job with the National Center for Appropriate Technology, which is a nonprofit. We run something called the ATRA project. That's the National Sustainable Ag Information Service. I'd encourage you to go. How many of you have ever heard of ATRA, A-T-T-R-A? Raise your hands. Okay. If you're a farmer or a gardener or a rancher, it's a really good resource. We run a toll-free line, actually 2 toll-free lines, one in English, one in Spanish. You can call and talk to a live person, ask any question related to sustainable agriculture or organic agriculture production or marketing of crops or livestock, and we'll get some response to you. We have a lot of information you can search our website for. There's 400 different pamphlets and publications, webinars about all kinds of stuff. We have an ecological pest management database that I think is pretty nifty. So just wanted to make you aware of that resource. But today I'm going to be talking about soils, and my hope is that from what I say, maybe you'll get one idea or just maybe start thinking about soils a little bit differently. You permaculture folks maybe are already there, but anyway, Atra is a good resource, and if I'll be talking about some other resources, but it's hard for me to talk and hold up stuff at the same time. Can you hear me okay if I do this? No. How far can I wander from this?
As long as it's not the hay, I can hold it up.
Okay. Well, so would you?
We can move the,
Yeah, let's talk about the resources first.
we can move the table.
Okay. So, if you're interested in soil, The Soul of the Soil by Grace Gershuni, she's a longtime organic, what I call one of the older organicos around, lives on the East Coast. She wrote this a while back with Joe Smiley, and this is a good primer on just what you might want to think about on soils. Okay, very good, but it costs money, you know.
Or you can get it from the library.
Yeah, that's
or
true.
request the library buy it.
This is one of my favorite books. This is a free download from SARE. It's Building Soils for Better Crops. SARE stands for Sustainable Agriculture, Research, and Education. So if you Google SARE and go to their website and go to their publications site, this is a free download. You don't have to pay for it. But getting the book is really nice, and it's not that expensive. It's $20. It has really good diagrams. It covers just about all the bases. If you read this, you'd know a lot more about soils than you do now. You know, it's called Building Soils for Better Crops. SARE, S-A-R-E. Just Google SARE or Sustainable Ag, Research, and Education. Your tax dollars at work. This is another good one by SARE, and I think Beth will talk about this later when she talks about cover crops, but this is a really good general informational piece and also free from the same website, Managing Cover Crops Profitably, and it talks a little bit about cover crops and then goes into specifics about the different legume, mustard, and grass cover crops and some that don't fit in any of those families. So really good resource for you. Cover crops are a good way to sustain your soil management effort.
And the title for the television?
Yeah, Managing Cover Crops Profitably. Free PDF download. What a deal. And finally, going back to the cover cropping, this is a little bit more recent, and also you'll have to pay for this. This is part of the UC. Cover Cropping for Vegetable Production, a Grower's Handbook. If you're doing any diversified vegetable production, this is a really good resource. Worthwhile investing. It's probably, I think, $20 from UC Ag and Natural Resources, UC ANR. Okay. And
So cover cropping for vegetable production.
yep. So, as Carolyn had mentioned, I'm here as a result of Beginning Farmer Rancher Development Project. That's a grant from the USDA. And so thank you, USDA Beginning Farmer Rancher Development Project. They fund us. That's a 3-year project, and we're working around the state providing workshops like this to beginning farmers. Can I ask a question? How many of you are farmers or beginning farmers? Raise your hand. Oh, good. Good. All right, great. That's wonderful. So I'd like to start off talking about soils, and I always start off a talk like this with a demo, and I'd like, if I could, to have Kelly, maybe you would come up here, grab the biggest hunk of soil out of this bag. Okay. Could you grab the biggest hunk of soil out of this bag, please?
Sure.
The biggest hunk.
Oh, this one.
All right, that's a big hunk. They're about the same size. So hold up the 2 hunks. These soils, I collected these soils exactly across the street from each other. They're both walnut orchard soils. So the parent material It's I think it's yellow silt loam. So the parent materials are exactly the same. They have been managed very differently. And so what I'd like you to do is, kind of circle around there and go towards, there's those two beakers right there. So if you could each very, very gently, just very gently, and at the same time, didn't think you were going to get on the stage, did you? Okay, so very gently, just place it very gently, and don't drop it, just place it onto that grid, okay? And hold that up. Can you guys in the back see what's happening there? Okay. Right. Well, there's winning and then there's losing, and so which would you say is the better soil? Just from what's happening, what you can observe. The one on the right, is that a better soil? It's kind of a trick question, but is it good that the soil falls apart? Well, this is all right. Good. This is really good because maybe you'll come away from this with one new idea. So, give it a little kind of jiggle. Okay. Okay. That's good. That's good. Okay. So. Right. This one, if you jiggle it, it kind of falls apart. This one, it just it's kind of falling apart pretty quickly. So this is what I call just a pretty basic aggregate stability test. And the difference between these soils is their management. The same parent material, same ratios of clay, silt, and sand. The management is very different. Could you hold that one up? So this one, there's a lot more fine particles in this beaker. The clay particles are going into solution. They'll eventually settle out. This one, it's a little bit clearer, right? The clay particles are being held a little bit more closely. And this one, well, let's talk about this one. This guy, this walnut orchard, he manages a very clean walnut orchard floor. Nothing ever grows there. He keeps it clean. He sprays it with herbicides, and there are some good agronomic reasons for that, or horticultural reasons for that, because you don't want to pick up a lot of trash when you shake the trees and sweep up the walnuts. But there's a price to be paid for that kind of management. The fellow across the street, he grows cover crops in his alleys every year and incorporates them, and so there's something covering the soil every year, particularly during the rainy season, because that's when the water is free, right? We get rainfall, cover crops come up, they're protecting the soil. This soil is not protected. This soil gets hammered, and plus it's not getting anything added to it. And my point here is that we've been managing soils for decades now, masking soil function symptoms by just adding chemical nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. We have somehow forgotten that the soil is an ecosystem. It needs to be managed as an ecosystem, not as a place to throw in NPK. NPK doesn't add anything except NPK. Organic matter is the basis of how the soils function. Think about how many years plants have evolved without humans, Millions. Hundreds of millions, probably. And so we come along, we start dumping in NPK and not thinking about soil ecology. And the plants kind of they're going, whoa, this is way different. And we end up spending a lot more money on inputs than we normally would have if farmers would think more about the soil ecology and managing the soil as an ecology and not as some place just to grow crops, right? I mean, that's an important thing to keep in mind, growing crops, keeping the soil covered. So you see it's continuing to, it's still falling apart. That one is just about disintegrated. Extrapolate that out to a landscape scale. And I'm going to be talking about why each of these things and what the impacts are as far as nutrient cycling and water cycling and storage. And so I thank you very much. Just set it gently down on the stage there, or on the table. Let me see. Thank you. Yeah, I would just like to pass out these resources. So these like sustainable soil management, I'm going to pass that out. That's a primer. It's a good primer about sustainable soil management. I only printed out 10 of them, or 15. It's available on our website. I didn't want to kill a lot of trees. I didn't know how many people were going to be coming, and I hate printing out a lot of paper. So you can get it from our website, Sustainable Soil Management. It's a good primer if you want to learn more about this.
So it's sustainable soil management, because there's a television crew here.
Right.
What's the
You
website?
go to the ATTRA website. That's www.attra.org, attra.org.
Since he only has 15 and we don't want you reading during the presentation, I'm not passing them out yet.
Okay. Executive decision here. So,
Yeah.
and we also have, this is available. This is drought programs and resources. So this is a listing of California and national organizations and entities that can provide some assistance to farmers. As well, it has a listing of all the ATTRA publications that have any mention of soils or compost, and there's a lot of them. So I printed out about 30 of these, and we can hand those out later. And there's a lot more resources on our website than just these, but I didn't want to print out like a ton of paper. And then I have created this resources for small farmers. If you're a small farmer, this might be a good resource for you. It's just a listing, 4 pages of organizations, everything from business planning to marketing, and a listing of resources, including a couple of the books I've mentioned are on the back. But it has a lot more extensive bibliography, a couple pages of books. So.
And this, of course, is the most important thing.
Right, and this, if anything I say today is interesting to you, or if you would, as a small farmer, and this is only open to small farmers, sorry. If you would like me to come out to your site, I can talk to you about soils. I can take some soil samples. I can send them to A&L Labs, which is my favorite soil testing facility, and talk over the soil analysis with you to help you better understand where the baseline of your soils are right now. So if you are interested in that kind of service, which is free, put your name and address and contact information on there, and I'll get in contact with you after, okay? But you have to be a farmer.
Rex, are you going to do our farm?
We could do that.
We're farmers.
We could do that. Question? Yeah.
What's the applicable definition of a small farm?
I'm allowing you folks to, if you're a big farm, you're qualified too, The USDA definition is for a small farm. Shoot.
10 acres.
Yeah.
1 to 10 acres is what the USDA
They use actually a financial. I prefer beginning farmers. For beginning farmers, USDA considers beginning farm because it's a beginning farmer rancher development program. Any farmer that has less than 9 years or less of experience. So.
9 years, 364
Right.
days, that is.
Yeah. NRCS considers anybody a farmer that can, the acronym is Natural Resources Conservation Service. And if you're a small farmer, you want to know about these folks because they can provide you cost share to plant cover crops, put in hedgerows, pollinator plantings, things like that. And there's a USDA service center located in each county. And you can find them by Googling NRCS Field Office Locator. But anyway, these are your tax dollars at work, and if you're a small farmer, you should take advantage of them. Okay. enough about resources.
Is this our weed?
That's your weed, right? And I'm going to talk. All right, I'm going to put this down just for a second.
Oh, he said that the TV won't be able to hear anything.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to go grab something. Sir, can you hold it?
I was just told that you can't hear anything I say unless I'm speaking into the mic, which I think is probably a good thing. But we're going to make him speak into the mic. Don't worry, this will all be edited out. This will be on CCTV.
This is a really low budget PowerPoint here. So I talked about the soil ecology, right? The soil ecology, the soil is the most complex ecology on the planet, okay? We've been managing it not very well. Matter of fact, 75% of the soils in North America, in our country, are considered degraded or severely degraded, and that is a result directly of mostly of lack of adding organic matter. Organic matter drives soil function, and I'm going to be talking about how that works. So this in the back, I'm sure you can't see this. Okay, thank you. I'm sure you can't see this, but this is kind of a schematic diagram. Down here, you have the organic matter, residues, crop residues, cover crops, could be compost, but the organic matter is the driver of the system, right? The organic matter supplies the energy for all the other critters because the organic matter brings in energy, and then all these other guys, the bacteria, the fungi, actinomycetes, and working up the size scale to mites and worms and springtails. The soil, well-managed soil, is like a big digestive system, right? And so if you have, but it starts with organic matter. You can't digest nothing. You can't digest really NPK. Really, it's just chemicals. It'll allow certain organisms to expand their population by feeding on the organic matter in the soil. But if you have soil with no organic matter, you're not going to have any soil ecology. It's as simple as that. And we've been mining the organic matter out of our soil over the years. Oop. Okay. At least it's not a hook, right? So there's different levels, but this complex soil ecology is driven by addition of organic matter. There's lots of different flavors of organic matter. But just to mention, I mentioned a few already, but the organic matter is really, there's an idea. What a concept. Okay, so the organic matter, and it's not just the organic matter itself. Once you have this ecology starting to thrive, and there's ways to get that kind of kick-started, but once this ecology starts thriving, then you have all these critters that are living, reproducing, pooping, shedding skins. They're byproducts. Living organisms produce a lot of chemicals, and there's all these byproducts that are given off by all these individual organisms. Like I said, it's the most diverse ecosystem on the planet, and so you have this incredible chemical stew of products and byproducts that this ecology is feeding off of, eating, metabolizing, recycling. And as this ecology builds up, you end up storing more and more energy in the soil. The soil becomes less leaky too, to water, to nutrients, right? You have this energy store in the soil that starts off with adding organic matter. So that's lesson one, add organic matter. There's a lot of different ways to do that. There's a lot of ways you can screw that up, adding a whole bunch of wood chips and incorporating them into your soil. That's a good way to screw up in some ways, because those wood chips, it's good organic matter, but I think you want to leave them on the top, because the wood chips are high carbon, and they'll take the nitrogen from the soil in order to decompose. So And if you have any questions about anything I say, just raise your hand because I want to make this pretty informal. So, talking about microorganisms. I know this is not easy to see. This is a root right here, this big thing that looks like I don't know, a snub-nosed snake or something. That's a root hair. These smaller things are mycorrhizae. The mycorrhizae infect the root. They allow the plant, in healthy soils, they allow the plant to access a much larger volume of the soil than in an unhealthy soil. If in an unhealthy soil, you're not going to have this population of mycorrhizae. You know, fungi are usually our friends in an agricultural setting, not our enemies. But because we've managed the soil so poorly, we don't rotate crops, we don't add organic matter, we end up increasing the populations of verticillium and fusarium and a lot of other nasty species that we don't really want. In a vibrant soil ecology, there's a lot of competition to those pathogens, and the pathogens population cannot really get to the level where they become pathogenic. Yes? How does mycorrhizae develop initially? That's a good question. They're in the soil. You know, they put out spores, or they either put out spores or what's called just propagules. You know, fungi operate in a lot of different ways. But what you want is to have a healthy population of these guys, and they're one of the first ones that go into, you know, carbonaceous kind of things. Leaf litter. You've probably been to the forest floor. You scrape around on the forest floor and you may see all these kind of a white veinal network of these things. That's mycorrhizae degrading, decomposing the leaf litter. Your compost depends a lot on mycorrhizae, fungi, and bacteria. But so these guys are important in phosphorus transport too. You know, they help mobilize phosphorus and get it to the plant. And they trade the plant with the plant. Let me see. Well, yeah, I'll get to that. So they'll trade with the plant. The plant is kind of feeding the fungus, and the fungus is feeding the plant. But I would include in the fungus over here, bacteria, and all the other critters in the soil, right? All right. Another thing most folks are not aware of is that, you know, up to 20%, even weeds. This looks like Grandella. I'm not sure if it is, but it smells good. What is it? Ditratria? Ditratria? Close enough. All right. It's kind of sticky. It looks like. Anyway, it's sticky. It seems to be, you have a monocrop out here, and it's about the only thing that grows. Even weeds, you know, up to 20% of any plant's photosynthate. So, you know, the above ground part, that's where the sugars and all the good stuff are made, right? Up to 20% of anything this plant photosynthesizes goes down into the roots and is exuded out into the roots or traded through these structures with mycorrhizae. You know, it goes out to the fungi to support the fungi. It goes out to bacteria in the rhizosphere. And there's a reason for that. The plant, you know, plants are pretty picky about where they send their photosynthetates, and they wouldn't be trading these expensive photosynthetates for free. They get a real benefit out of exuding, you know, putting out these root exudates, and it's amino acids, it's water, it's sugars, all kinds of stuff. Well, organic acids, vitamins, plant hormones, growth substances, and it supports a mycorrhizal and microbial population. And that population in turn supports some of the bigger predators and parasites and the basis of the soil ecology. If your soil is bare, is it getting any of those photosynthetates? If you're driving up and down agricultural areas, do you see bare soil? You see tons and tons, acres and acres of bare soil. Matter of fact, during this time of year, most of what you see is bare soil, not covered soil. I'm not saying weeds are good, because you end up with weed seeds, which are really not so good. But any cover, especially if you're expecting an El Nino year and bare soil, that's bad news. And here's some reasons why. I don't know if you can see that. That's taken around 5 points. I mean, it's bare soil, like acres, miles of bare soil out to the horizon. And this is pretty good soil, probably class 1 soil. Nothing on it. Like I said, there may be good agronomic reasons, but what happens? What happens if you have bare soil? And bare soil that's not well aggregated, excuse me, still holding together after all these minutes. Not so well. Fell apart. Okay. So what I just said over there was one of those soil clumps has pretty much fallen apart. The other one is still holding together. What happens if you have poorly aggregated soil? Like that soil on the left is holding together because of the chemical glues that the mycorrhizae put out and the bacteria put out. Those chemical glues give those soil clumps aggregate stability. That's the term for it. But it stays together better. And if you have these aggregates that hold together, water, whether it's irrigation water or rainfall, will go through the surface and go into your root zone and then also into your water table. What is disturbing about these thousands and thousands of acres of bare ground is that they're going to do this. As soon as you have rainfall, those aggregates fall apart. What happens to the clay particles? They go right up to the surface. They form a seal. You've probably seen these, after a rain and kind of it dries out, there's this kind of flat clay seal on top of the soil. That seals the soil so no other rainfall is going to go down. So what I'm predicting is we're going to have massive floods, and this soil, the top soil, some of it is going to run off. It's not going to go into the water table. It's not going to go into the root zone. It's going to go out to the ocean carrying the clay particles. Often have nutrients such as phosphorus, potassium, calcium adsorbed onto their surface. So we're losing the soil, we're not getting the water, and we're losing nutrients, and we're polluting surface waters at the same time. So it's a lose-lose-lose situation if you're managing your soil poorly. You're not keeping it covered. Keeping your soil covered is really important during these heavy rains, because even well aggregated soil can eventually fall apart. But if you have poorly aggregated soil, it's going to do this right away. It's going to just seal up. And once it's sealed, not only does this water not go into the root zone, it seals air out of the root zone too. So you're setting yourself up for anaerobic conditions in the root zone. That stresses the plant. It makes it more susceptible to a lot of fungal and bacterial root infections. So good soil management there's so many positives to it, but we've been masking the symptoms of poor soil management with just using chemicals. Not only, NPK fertilizers, but, all the herbicides and fungicides that we apply to our systems, that's partly a result of poor soil management. Raindrops, I'm hoping we'll get some rain this El Nino year. It's great. But those little drops, they're like little bombs. They explode and they impact the soil, and you end up with this ceiling. I have lots of pictures of this kind of sealing. It seals the surface. If you do have nitrogen in the soil or any carbon in the soil, you get anaerobic conditions. Those bacteria in the soil are starting to digest carbon into methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. They're metabolizing your nitrogen into nitrous oxide, which is 300 times as potent a greenhouse gas as CO2. So there's all kinds of bad things that happen with poor soil management. Let's see. And you know, we got a little bit of a late start. I think maybe that's all I'll say about that. I'm welcome. I'll take a few questions and then I'll open it up to the next speaker. Solutions, what do you mean?
Say on your own small acreage. Don't let certain things happen, but do other things.
Well, yeah. So this fellow here asked, you know, what if you have small acreage? What solutions or what do you do? And I would say, first, if it was me, I would first figure out where my nutrient status is in a small acreage. If you're in the city, doing an urban farm, and I'm glad you brought that up. You want to test for heavy metals. Now we have a publication on the ATRA website. It's called Start a Farm in the City. Okay, you can, within that publication, there's a form. It's a soil submittal form for University of Massachusetts, and you can get a cheap, for $10. You can get your soils tested for heavy metals. I think cadmium, mercury, lead. You know, the big three. But if you are farming within city boundaries or next to, like, you know, you want to know the history of your land. That's first. Do a soil test, nutrient status, and if you're in an urban setting that might have been an old gas station or next to a house even that had lead paint flaking off the sides, you want to test those areas and get an idea of what the heavy metal concentration is in your soil. And then I would add compost. Get good quality compost. You know, you can get green waste. There's manure-based compost. Keep your ground covered during these rainy seasons. We got a pound of free cover crop seed here. I don't know what the contents of the seeds are, but it's organic. Is it grasses, legumes, or a mix?
It's legumes and veg, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, vetch is a legume as well, but so. Oh, okay. So, yeah, it looks like you have. All right. So you have some small grains. Looks like you have some mustards and some legumes. So that's a really nice mix. You can plant just one species of grass. You can customize your cover crop, and I think Beth will talk about that more later. But you know, depending if you want biomass, you plant grasses. If you want nitrogen, you can plant legumes because they fix nitrogen. If you want just something to cover and, you know, biological activity, plant a mix of grass and legumes, because in nature very rarely do you see a monocrop. It's always, you know, in the Great Plains, it's always this diversity of species, and I think they interact well, you know, and it's insurance. If you have a dry year, maybe the grasses will come up better, and then later on the legumes will come up, you know, and so it's the more species you can add to a point, the better off you are. So keep the ground covered, add organic matter, figure out what your nutrient status is. I'd say those are first steps in a farm.
So we get our compost from the city of Berkeley, and can you talk about that, because they do the hot treatment, and when the compost comes it doesn't have living life in it, so how do we best use that?
Okay, I think the question was, this lady gets her compost from Berkeley and they do a hot treatment, and most compost it heats up when and I don't know if they pasteurize it or not, or I doubt they would spend that much money on. Do you buy it or do they give it away? It's free. Yeah, they're not going to pasteurize it. So compost naturally heats up, and there's still life in there, but what you want to do is you can use that as a mulch. You can incorporate that in your soils, but I would warn you, you know, compost, there's no standard for compost, and you can have really raw compost with still a lot of undigested organic matter. And if you incorporate it, and you know, if it smells a little bit off or like ammonia-y, don't incorporate that into your soil. Leave it on top as a mulch. If it smells like good earth, you know, that's probably pretty finished. you could incorporate that and be comfortable with that. But you know, ask around, like ask around to your farmer neighbors and find out, like, where do you buy your compost? It looks pretty good, and you know, they'll give you the lowdown. Okay. Yeah.
Till or not till?
Oh, good question. All right, if you're what? Oh yeah, to till or not to till? That is the question, and that's a very good question. And if, from the point of view of a soil organism, you know, a plow or a disc, you know, what does that look like? It's like an earthquake and a tornado and this massive destruction, right? You're better off not tilling, I think, because your soil, you know, there's soil organisms, earthworms, and a lot of other critters are churning the soil and moving it around. I mean, Darwin did his initial early studies in the 1820s about, you know, he left some pennies on the top of the soil, and he saw after a year there was, you know, a quarter inch, a half an inch of soil on top of all the pennies because of the earthworms. If you don't have earthworms, then you need to start, you know, adding organic matter, because it's probably because there's not enough for them to feed on. So you're best off not to till if you can do it. Tillage, a lot of folks gotta till though, you know. They have giant acreages, they can't mulch everything. How much time? Two more questions. So the lady in the back. Ma'am? Oh, well. There you go. Lady asked about chicken manure, and that's a very good question. Chicken manure can be good. And well, let me say something about all manures. If you leave them on the surface, right, manures are going to vary between like 1 and say 4% nitrogen. If you leave them on the surface, half that nitrogen is going to go away. It's going to volatilize. So if you're using manures and you want to save that nitrogen, you want to incorporate it. But chicken manure tends to be higher in phosphates too, relative to other manures, although all manures have some phosphates in them. But if you're adding manures on any scale, try and get an idea of what nitrogen you're adding and what phosphorus you're adding, because generally if you add for a plant's nitrogen needs, you're going to over add for the plant's phosphorus needs, because most manures have a level of phosphorus that the plants can't take up. The nitrogen will probably be okay, but the phosphorus is, if you do it every year, right? And one thing for small farmers, if you're a small farmer, the California Water Resource Control Board is going to require all farmers of any size to have a nitrogen budget in the next 2 years. Depending on where you live, some years, matter of fact, some places it's this year, some places it's next year, some places it's 2017. But so start thinking about nitrogen budgets, nitrogen budgets, what your crop needs to grow, and what your ground is putting in, what your irrigation water, how much nitrate in your irrigation water, because a lot of irrigation water, like here, would have significant amounts of nitrate. And then what kind of inputs you're putting down. Okay. I think last question, and then, yeah. Is aerating? Can you, what do you mean, like double digging or? Yeah, so the question is aerating with like a rototiller or a machine. So the deal with aerating, it's kind of like tilling, and it serves a purpose if you have really tight soils, like really heavy clay soils. You might want to open them up, but there's ways to, if you have heavy clay soils, that's where a soil test comes in, and if you want to learn more about soil tests, give me a call. These are my business cards. Send them around. Just Don't take them if you don't intend to use them. But so aeration, what you're doing, you're opening up the soil to oxygen. So in some ways that's good. If it's a really tight, heavy clay soil, that might be good. Don't ever work with clay soils when they're wet. You'll ruin your soils for years. If you have a soil compaction layer, a plow plan at 6 or 8 or 12 inches, there's dense layer of compacted soil that the roots can't penetrate. That's important. But when you aerate the soil, you're exposing all the organic matter in that soil to oxidation. There's bacteria in the soil. The bacteria, once they get that oxygen, if there's enough nitrogen, they're going to go to town on your organic matter. And they're going to start digesting that organic matter if there's enough moisture. Another aspect of this, if you over-fertilize with chemical nitrogen and you do that kind of aeration, you're literally throwing gas on the fire because you're opening up the soil to more oxygen. The bacteria are going to go to town on the nitrogen and what little organic matter you have left, and you're going to be burning up that organic matter. So over-fertilization actually burns up organic matter. So thank you.
Before you run off, I have one question. We called this event carbon sinking. Can you tell us the practices that sink carbon versus the ones that throw carbon into the atmosphere? Because it's just like 5 years ago, I remember my state senator telling me individually we can't save the bees. Well, now they're saying individually is just one of the big ways to save the bees. So individually, we have to sink carbon.
Okay, good question. And so I know you guys can't see this, but there's different flavors of carbon, right? Cover crops, that's kind of fast food carbon. If you want to kickstart your soil ecology, that's a good way to do it. But you're not going to build up that much carbon. I mean, if you do that every year consistently, that's great. But that's what I call labile organic matter. It's quickly digested. It has a very high nitrogen to carbon ratio. The relative amount of nitrogen is high relative to the amount of carbon, so it'll be digested pretty quickly. Compost, plant litter, there's kind of medium, and we just do these categories because we're humans and we're reductionist, and it's not divided up into really fast organic matter and medium and very slow. It's a spectrum of organic matter. But the medium stuff is like compost. Compost will, you can add compost to your soil. That will sequester some carbon, for a long time, 5, 10, 20 years maybe, depending on the type of compost you're using. Wood chips, biochar, things with really high carbon, straw hulls, things like that. That will add more carbon, but I wouldn't incorporate into your soil. I would leave it on top because that will take up the nitrogen that's in your soil. So, like I said, there's all different kinds of carbon. If you add, say, legumes versus just like cover crops, right? Legumes are going to digest a lot more quickly than, say, a mature straw, right? You can incorporate the straw or just leave it on the top. That's going to have more longer term carbon than, say, a legume cover crop. But it depends on what you want from your soil. What do you want your cover crop to do for you? You can design a cover crop that will provide beneficial insect habitat. You can design a cover crop that will just add 120 pounds of nitrogen, maybe, if you let it go long enough. Or you can design a cover crop to add biomass. But usually it's the higher, like the grasses, the sorghum Sudan grass, that'll add more biomass, long-term carbon. I know this is a really, really complex subject. You're not going to get it all in one day, but if you kind of go to those resources I presented, and you can learn a lot more about it. And they'll talk about the long-term and medium and short-term carbon in that building soils for better crops. Yeah. Thank you for listening. It's a great audience. Thanks.
So Rex told us how complex all of this is, and today we've invited someone who is a teacher who I happened to go to Berkeley and met this person, and he had a new book of his on his laptop, and I started reading it, and I was like, wow, this guy really knows how to make complex things simple. And what he's going to talk about today, this is Matt Powers, and I know many of you have come here to hear him. He's going to be talking about permaculture. He's going to be talking about his new book. And I hope Matt will tell us what he would do with this blank slate of a farm we have, because when I look at it, I think, oh, I know we need permaculture here, but I hope he gives us some free consulting.
You're welcome. All right. All right, so how many people here know what permaculture is? All right, cool. So permaculture is a design science that mimics the patterns of nature to provide beneficially for both people and the planet, right? Right, that's the definition. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, so I'm here today to talk, I've been asked to talk about what permaculture is, how it can apply to the site, and also about carbon sinking and about how permaculture works with that. So to start off with, let's attack that whole reductionist thing that we do, right? So we look around, I'm walking around, I always look around when I walk, and before I do an event, I always kind of like, you guys probably saw me walking around stretching and maybe even doing a vocal warm-up. I do that. So I was just a musician before I was this. So I'm looking around and I see all this consolidation of waste, and I see all this consolidation of energy, and then I see denuded landscape. And what we're doing is reductionist. We're reducing things to a simplistic format so we can easily quantify it in such an easy way that we can turn it into money or turn it into a projection amount. And the problem with that is that that kind of reductionist kind of way of thinking doesn't work well with nature. Nature is holistic. And I didn't know what the term holistic meant for a long time. I thought it something new age or something. It literally means whole. It means that keeps everything that would be not included. When you reduce things, makes things simple, you actually cut off important aspects that could bite you later on. So when we talk about tilling, for instance, that's a really good one for something that bites you later on. When we till the soil, we expose it. We also remove its structure. We also prevent it from doing all the things that nature has been working so hard to do by stratifying the soil layers. That's why roots have different like levels. That's why certain roots go really deep, because they want stuff in the subsoils, and because they need to follow their path, right? And the soil is developed alongside that. So we need to develop alongside nature, and we have for such a long time that I believe all this knowledge that permaculture is, and all the science that has led up to it, and all the science that correlates to it, is innate. I believe it's common sense. I believe that everyone here already has a sense of it. And you're like, yeah, burning all the branches every year versus turning them into topsoil seems more right? Instead of studying the carbon. I live in the Central Valley. Does anyone live in the Central Valley? All right, so this is where all the fires are. And this is where the fires have been for a really, really long time. And up here, I know that the rough fire, right, just happened. And people were like really shocked. And I'm like looking at everyone's property. I'm like, well, in the Central Valley, everyone would go fire when they look at your land, because all your brush is all over the place. And you look at the actual soil, and the cracks go 15 to 20 feet deep because you got clay soil, right? So it'll do that. There's no water in the ground. The fire can go beneath the ground and go under things and touch roots and light roots on fire, and then go 40 feet over there and light up there. So all these things are going on, but you guys kind of don't see it because of the ocean is bringing all this moisture in and condensing on your plants. And so the trees look green, but your soil's all dried out, and the scrub and the ground layer is all dried out. And so when I look around here, I see all these resources that we consider as waste, and they all need to be put back in their proper places. And that means decentralizing. That means holistic thinking on site, rather than consolidating and stripping from other parts of the world, and then having things that, you know, I mean, like this site, for instance, this site is a huge, like, wind-blown site with no tree on site. Is this site a landfill beneath? How far down? 6 feet?
This soil was brought in from all over the county, and it was all tested. It's cleaned. It is a clean fill project, but it was like a pile of orange, a pile of brown, a pile of gray, a pile of black, and then, of course, it's not mixed together properly.
Okay, cool. So we could work with that. So as long as there's not radioactive sludge 6 feet beneath us, we could totally work with this site. And like these resources, these were not. This was waste beneath our feet at one point. And we're kind of, all of us are gathered here just like this waste is gathered here, and we're all trying to come up with solutions. Because the reality is, we have to figure it out. We're trapped in one room, it's called Earth, and our garbage is being pushed to one side of the room. And we're expecting to grow food on the other side of the room, except like the garbage is leaking onto the other side, and it's getting into grow our food. And you know what I mean? We're at this point where we need to like do something, or we're going to be on the side of the scale that we all hear about and are afraid to, you know, really let into our consciousness because it's a paralytic kind of feeling, right? And the thing is, I was there many years ago, and I would go on Facebook and type things about what I felt and be like, no, your politician's wrong because of this, and I thought that if we change something and we tell you to do this and all this and run around, right? This is the classic way we think when we're like 18, right? And so it took me a while. I was 18 for many years. It took me a while, and then I came to this point where I couldn't expend my energy. And a lot of us get to this point, right? We just realize we just can't expend that energy. I've got to do my thing. I've got to do this. And part of you kind of dies when you do that too, though. So you let that you know that's wrong. We got to change that go, and part of you kind of dies. And so I was in public school. I was teaching, and I'm like fighting to stay alive and like do what's right and like teach kids outlining and argue with the other teachers and to, like to have footnotes that connect to the actual like quotation marks. Yeah, they don't. They, in the Central Valley, they don't understand that you need to have your works cited to connect to the quotes somehow. Yeah, so like I was fighting all these crazy battles over things that were like taught to me in middle school, and so I was doing all this stuff, getting caught up, and then I was trying to grow an organic garden, and I wasn't getting the yields high enough, and I was in that boat where I was frustrated. I didn't have any answers. Politics are all screwed up. The environment's screwed up. I can't get my garden. The school's screwed up. I was pissed. I feel like most of America's there, and they don't know why and can't articulate it. And so I would like write blogs and write songs about it, and nothing was getting any better. And so I discovered permaculture one day, and I was watching a video, and I was like, wait, I remember that from science class. And I was like, but that made sense. Hold on. And I started like watching all these videos of Jeff Lawton and then Sepp Holzer, and then like Sepp Holzer doesn't use machines. He's growing citrus in the Alps in the middle of winter without machines, without fertilizers or pest controls. In fact, he never uses a greenhouse. And so I'm like, what's going on here? I'm doing everything wrong. And so I'm like, okay, I'm having this kind of revolution where I'm like studying now harder than I've ever studied in my entire life, other than when my wife first got cancer. That was kind of the beginning for me of trying to find out what healthy actually is. And organic is like a government, it's a government thing. It's not a scientific thing where it's like, here, this is what organic is, and it's this, and we can prove it. It's just a government like thing that can change. Politicians can decide to like vote on it and change the language in the law. So that whole thing, I was like, wow, so okay, that's concerning. And then I started being able to like prove like what food's nutrition or nutritional density is. You guys know what Brix meter is? Everyone should own one. They're $15. You take the juice from a plant or a vegetable, you drop it on there, you hold it up to the light, it tells you what the number is, you test it against others of the same kind. So tomatoes against tomatoes, apples against apples, and what it tells you is how well it's photosynthesizing. So it tells you the starch levels and the sugar levels, so you can actually know how ripe it is, or how well, and if they're both really ripe, you figure out which one did better as it was ripening, as it was photosynthesizing. So yeah. BRIX, a bricks meter. We should bring these should be normal in farmers markets, and the guy should be running up to you, go, oh, check mine, come on, check mine. Yeah, all right, better than him, huh? You know, we want that. We want people to be able to scientifically prove the nutritional content of their food, and then argue over it. Yeah, you want to argue over the nutrition, what's best for me in reality, rather than, you know, us trusting politicians to like bandy words around and then do nothing, or create legislation that does nothing. Because the end result is we are the people making the carbon, so we must be the people to put it back. It is our dollars that demand that we extract all this stuff from the earth. It is our dollars that demand that we farm this way. And so we can completely overnight reverse things. I did an interview last week on my podcast Permaculture Tonight with someone talking about this. I want to get my church, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I'm a Mormon. I want to get my church to switch to like off the conventional, because they own almost as much agricultural land as anyone. I think they're second in the entire country. They do these welfare farms, so they make all the food at that farm goes to people who need to be fed. So my idea is, it's like, okay, well, what if you stop taking fast donations after you build the farm? Because the farm will then pay for itself, because it will be running 100% off of its own produce, its own compost, its own, like, you know what I mean? And then suddenly they don't take any more money. They're completely off grid, and suddenly half of the farms in America don't use petrochemicals anymore, and they're also making money to pay for their employees. Then they don't have any more cost, and then their neighbor is like, wait, what? I'm paying how much in my debt each month? And then the market flips overnight, because those pest companies can't pay, because you guys know like the overhead for running a business, right? So you guys know why Monsanto's in such trouble, is because you lose 20% of your market, like in one year, you're done. Because no one has the ability to invest in you, because our market is so tight that if you make one misstep, you're dead. That's why we keep having these consolidations with the big companies eat the little ones, because you make one misstep in our market right now, it's like, so it's kind of that way with our environment too. We need to not make that mistake though. We're at that point where the oceans are right there. If we do the wrong thing with the ocean, we pull out the wrong thing right now, we could have a complete collapse in certain areas. I mean, we do have dead zones, right? That's a collapse, a localized collapse. So when I learned about permaculture and I saw these people doing this stuff, it blew my mind and gave me this like overwhelming like sense of hope that this is all not as bad as it seems. And you guys don't even understand what's possible. And then you guys are doing bad things. You don't even understand the money you can make doing good things. And it's not like all those people doing bad things are bad people, because we got to remember that word bad is a tricky thing, because there's wrong, right? That is incorrect, and there's better and all that stuff. But when we moralize people, that's an instant way to get them to stop helping us and to become our enemies. So those people that are doing agriculture the wrong way, they're stuck. Most of them are generational farmers who are just trying to do what their family and their heritage has told them to do. And they're in debt. They're actually, a lot of them are inheriting debt. And so they're in this bent over backwards position, and they don't know what to do. But the only way we can set them free is by getting them out of debt. And I don't think we're going to do it through the USDA. We have to do it with the farmers doing it themselves. And then when they do that, they've liberated themselves. And there's nothing more empowering than liberating yourself. Nothing more empowering than feeding yourself or taking control of something in your life that you thought was outside of your control. So we just need to do that and bring this truth. I mean, there's a guy, Curtis Stone. He is in Canada using 1/3 of an acre of a backyard in the middle of a city. He's making 70 grand. And it wasn't 70 grand last year. I think it was like 50. And the year before that, it was like 40. But every year, he's figuring out how to take the same plot of land and stack the functions in such a way and rearrange the nature in such a way that he can get more abundance out of it and more wealth out of it. So, and I mean, that's not really the end all be all, but I'm just saying that if they want to make money and they feel like they need to get out of debt, it's actually quite easy to do. They just have to break out of the system. And that takes steps, and that might take, you know, partial steps at first, half their property or part of their property, and leverage off. But it can happen, and it is happening. Farmers are doing this. I was just talking to someone who took a course at a old conventional orchard that was turned into a permaculture orchard, and it's doing amazing. Soils are amazing. The fruit is amazing. The thing with nature. All right. So, and has anyone heard of the Loess Plateau? Okay, the Loess Plateau. All right. So a little bit of Chinese history. Here we go. So China has the Yellow River, the China's sorrow, right? Remember this? Every time it moves, it kills millions of people. Last time it moved, I think it killed 20 million. Remember this? They create the dikes on it. And then when the empire doesn't maintain the dikes, it spills over, and that's a signifier that's the end of the empire. Anyway, I like history. So this river has been this bane of China forever, and it got all the silt it carries down. And this silt actually is the reason why northern Chinese people do not have lids that fold inward. They are designed in response to this dust that's being blown across the northern plains. Their eyelids don't catch that dust. The silt would go right in my eyes, and within a few years, the irritant would start to blind me because I'm not designed for that area. And so they've actually, in 7 years, solved the problem. They took an area that was burnt out by agriculture 10,000 years ago. The Han family started, the Han dynasty started in the Loess Plateau. Agriculture in China started there. And it's literally burnt out. And people were just grazing it with goats, and the land was just blighted and everything. It is now all terraced. It is green, and it's 800% more productive. And the people there are becoming wealthy. It's a province that was extraordinarily poor. It's serial poverty. And now they're becoming wealthy. And they're doing it with things that exponentially increase. And so I'm gonna just talk about the seed economy for a second. So do you guys know how the seed economy works? This is something I'm super excited about. So this is the real economy. The reason we eat grains, the reason we live the way we live, have breads and all this stuff, is because we came out of the seed economy. The seed economy had so much abundance that we started eating our seeds. And that's what grain is. It's just seeds. So the seed economy is coming back right now. And it is the idea that we grow seeds, which grow food and grow more seeds. And then we grow more seeds. And then we have more seeds, and then we can share those seeds or sell them for cheap, and then suddenly their value becomes nothing to us, and we can barter them because we have so many. And then they're valuable to other people because they don't have them. And then when we breed seeds, how many people breed plants? How awesome is it to make something new that is way better than anyone else's? And everyone can do it. When we save seeds, our seeds are new. They've adapted to your property, they've adapted to your soil, and they're better. They're better than anyone else's seeds for your land after a few years. And if you save seeds, especially with things like pumpkins, it's so easy to tell with the flesh. You can even measure year to year. The flesh gets thicker and thicker and thicker, and the seeds get fatter and fatter. So these things get better and better. And that is how the economy, that's how humans worked. We exponentially expand, we exponentially increase our ability to do things. We exponentially increase our minds, our education, we spread, we try to lift our children higher than we did. That's the seed economy. All of our economies should be designed this way, except we somehow, at a certain point, decided to attach our economy to finite resources in the ecosystem. The reason we did that was that allowed for some people to be in control and other people to be controlled. It is and that's why people are so upset by permaculture or organic gardening spreading or backyard gardening spreading or seed saving, because seed sharing is now illegal in California, if you know about that. Yeah, they passed that sneaky law without letting us know. So we need to share seed. We need to be spreading. This is what humans are, and we need to be making ourselves better and better, because that's exactly what is natural. And if our economy actually reflects what is natural, our economy will continually get better, and we'll continually get it better. Our society will continue to get better. And that's kind of the point of permaculture, and that's why I went on that kind of divergence there, because permaculture is a system of design. It's a design science, and it's not just gardening. It's not just food. It's not something you can pigeonhole. It's actually connective science. It's a design science, and that's why it's for some people hard to define. So I don't know how clear that was. That was fun for me. Can you tell I miss teaching school? Right now, my students are juniors in the Central Valley and missing me. They tweet me, though, so it's fun. And a few of them are actually in my online course. I actually teach. I couldn't stop teaching, so I have an online course. The permaculturestudent.com is my website. I teach life skills. So permaculture design is taught to people usually at PDCs. It's usually like a 10 to 12 day course. 72 hours is what it's supposed to be. And in this time period, people learn everything. They learn how trees work. They learn how water works. They learn how soil works. And people come out of it completely rebooted, because they see the world completely differently with new eyes. And a lot of people who were charged to begin with whatever their thing was, whether it's their religion, whether it's soil, whether it's nut trees, whether it's social justice, it doesn't matter what, they come out supercharged, because they go, wait a second, this applies to my thing too. And it's a way of thinking that's so positive and powerful, because it shows that we always can find a solution that's ethical, and we always can do something to make a situation better. So to start with, carbon sinking, unless you guys want me to define more about what permaculture is. Carbon sinking. Okay, and then we'll go on to the site. So carbon sinking. So I heard him talking about tilling, and yes, you technically can do some shallow tilling in the upper cold temperate climates. I don't know about here though, because the soil here has no structure. And the wounds you leave in the soil here really need a lot of care to tie up. So let's talk about trapping carbon. So when we till the soil, when we burn things, when we have dust, when we have any kind of desiccating act like salted winds or something like that, we're actually removing carbon from the soil because you're slowing the growth, right? So carbon sequestration actually is really, I'm not going to stand in front of you. Carbon sequestration is really about organic matter and moisture. Because if you have moisture in your ground, you're going to be able to hold that carbon, it's going to stick. And if you have enough organic matter, it's going to have the soil life present, that whatever new carbon you have in play is going to be pulled into the system, and it's not going to leave the system. So organic matter, you could take, I was just talking about this, you could take sand, just straight up sand, and Elaine Ingham does this sort of thing, and just combine it with organic matter and compost tea that. And you're going to find that you're going to have black, loamy soil if you do it right. And you can take the jar soil test and shake it and have it be sand again with a big organic layer. But it literally, we can build soil on anyone's property, anywhere. And Elaine Ingham also has proved that every teaspoon of soil from everywhere on Earth has all the elements to grow food and life in it. It's the soil life that releases it. So soil life needs organic matter to be there, and it needs certain elements, and it also needs habitat, right, to survive. If we do that, we can expect to have the ingredients that we want to grow the food that we want. Water retention, soil life holds the most water. Soil life makes 80% of the nitrogen that plants need. And then you pair it with a nitrogen fixing plant, right, as your anchor plants. So you do like nitrogen fixing trees as anchors between your fruit trees, and then around your annuals you intermix like what you would call a cover crop, I guess, but the reality is our soils are supposed to be 8 to 10% organic matter. They're like 1 to 2% if you're doing well, I guess. So you need to be planting beans everywhere anyway. So just throw them in there. I do it all the time. It's wonderful. If you're worried about them strangling things, put bush beans, right? And if you're if you want things to trellis, then put things that like that. I mean, how many people have tried orange giant amaranth? Oh wow. Okay, orange giant amaranth. The base gets this thick. It's amaranth that grows from a seed this little, and it gets this thick. I can't touch my fingers around it. It gives you so much biomass, and it is so strong that you could trellis up that anytime. So it's actually I grew it for 2 years, 3 years, and it's mine go 14 feet tall. I don't know anyone with as tall as that, but I don't know anyone saving seed like I do. So soil, the thing with soil is that you got to have the organic matter, and then you got to have the shade. If you're in the desert climate and you don't have shade, I'll catch it if it goes. If you don't have shade, you won't be able to retain moisture. You will not be able to have soil life happen, and you won't be able to have the processes the succession build. So let me talk for a second about the succession. So when we talk about soil and carbon, it's really a reductionist way of thinking. It is a step in a cycle. It is a part of something much greater than carbon and much greater than just the soil. The soil is the medium for all life, so I'm not going to downplay the soil. So what's going on is there's a succession that happens. You go to the edge of the desert, you go to the edge of the ocean, you have like all this simplified life, right? And then it's all salt hardy, and you have like sea kale and all these kind of tougher things. Then you know the actinobacterial soils, and you move further in, and it's less bacterial dominated, and it's more even between fungi and bacterial. And then you have all of our garden vegetables appearing there, and you have most of our fruit trees. And then you go further and it becomes fungal dominated. You enter into the old growth forest, you have the giant trees. So there's this pattern to the way life works and stabilizes. And if we don't actually operate within that, and we don't actually recreate the areas that these things, like, all right, so all these edges, we create these zones within zones, and the centers of those zones would have things like the groves, the sequoia, giant sequoia groves. That's the inner of the inner. We need to rebuild the edges so that we can have inners, and then rebuild the inners so that we can have the inner inners. And that's why we have the giant sequoias are dying and everything. We're looking at the beginning of the succession and being like, yes, we need to focus on that. But the reality is, it's like our old growth, the linchpin for all human life, right, is dying. And the reason I say it's the linchpin for all human life is trees are the habitat for humanity. If we did not have trees covering the earth, we would not have had the animals to support people. We would not have had people. So without these things in place, we can't expect to support the amount of life that we have. And if you look at what's happened with the world, we're really sick, and all the animals are dying, right? I mean, people are sick. My wife's had cancer 3 times. Okay? People are sick, and it's environmental. And people are always asking themselves, what did I do wrong to get cancer? And they're like 22, right? What did you do wrong? You did nothing different from the person next to you. You know what I mean? I mean, especially in our society, right? Everyone's the same as the next person, right? So, especially at 18, right? It's like they've been through the same exact experiences. It's a generalization, but you know what I mean. We have all the same information running around in our heads. And that's why I wanted to write these books. Because these books give the information that was missing in my education. This is the life skills. This is the information in clear academic language. Like, I know I talk like I'm from Brooklyn, because I lived there for a little while. But but I don't write that way, thankfully. Permaculture began simply as permanent agriculture, an ethical, sustainable food system, but it has expanded to be an ethical design science and to provide stability for permanent cultures. It focuses on using renewable energies in ways that nature already does, but by design, capturing and utilizing all, including potential energy. Permaculture works with and benefits and extends the patterns of nature. So that's how it's written. And that's what I spent most of my academic career doing, is working on writing and clarity. And I don't speak as well as I write, but thankfully that's the other way around. And I made it so that it would be available to middle schoolers, because the proximal verbal understanding of most people is 8th to 10th grade. Most people don't like doing calculus in their free time. It's shocking, I know. But so like the K through 12 thing, like the understanding and the verbal levels, I just picked that level, and it became an all ages thing, and people are buying it and using it all over the world. So just because it was designed originally for middle schoolers, don't be afraid to check it out and see what it's like, because for a lot of people it's a way that they can understand the science without it being science-y, because it is common sense, and it's our right to know these things. I believe that every person on earth has the right to know how to beneficially participate in the cycles of nature. That's why we're here, right? We're here to be beneficial components of the ecosystem. Humans are the most powerful entities for good on the planet. We're also the most powerful entities for bad. And we know that, right? We see it. We turn on the TV, that's all we see. But we are the opposite as well, and we don't get that, enough in the news or enough, in maybe our daily lives. But we are the only element that can turn around what's going on right now. Because the systems of the earth are to wipe everything clean with an ice age. You know that, right? It's like, oh, okay, and we're gonna achoo. Next. So we don't really want that. We want to do what we can do, and we can change things overnight. We can build soils overnight. So speaking of which, this site right here, I would put something like an invasive weed along the edge. That's a tree that we can cut later. So I would put something to create a windbreak that would be unstoppable, and then put something between it, behind it, that would stop it, right? So something that you can take out later, either with pigs or just wood chipper, what? Or goats, yeah. Something you can remove, but something that will be a weed. Something that will, like legumes. How many people know black locust, honey locust? Right. People are like, those are bad trees, right? No, not really, actually. If you go online and look up Miracle Farms in Quebec, Stefan Sokobiak, he made the Permaculture Orchard movie. His orchard it's the nap planting. So it's nitrogen fixer, apple, pear. So he's doing honey locust, apple, pear, honey locust, apple, pear. And that honey locust is a pre-nodulating nitrogen fixer. So it's actually, it doesn't have the nodules that all the typical nitrogen fixers have, but it's actually fixing nitrogen. He can prove this with a soil sample. It's fixing nitrogen to the fruit trees next to it. So he doesn't have to fertilize. And then when it gets too big, he just cuts the branches off and drops them on the ground, because they fix fertilizer, they're nitrogen fixing too. Because they're branches, they are that long-term carbon that he was talking about, right? The scale of carbon. It's literally just, is it green and leafy? Yeah, that'll break down fast. Is it thicker and stronger? Yeah, this will take a little bit longer. Is it a branch? Oh, yeah, that's thick. It'll take a long time to break down. That's the whole carbon thing, guys. Okay. So he's got this setup, and he's literally just cutting it and dropping it to the ground, and that's feeding the trees. And he's got it set up so each week is a row. So he just goes, oh, it's the first week of January, and he goes in and right, and he's like, oh, it's the first week of this, and then every week he has a different row. He's designed it so that he has like hardly any work. It fertilizes itself. He has it set up in water is under this plastic that he has set up. And he's got it set up in such a way that traps the moisture. He actually rips it along the side, and he tucks the plastic in a foot, and then he does it up there, and then he does alliums like onions and chives around the trees because they're insectary, right? Their stink keeps away the bugs. He does all these different things because he doesn't have to. So in other words, those trees, those plants, all those things are replacements for him doing it. So he's not out there spraying, get those bugs out of here, you know. He's not out there like fertilizing and doing the compost. You know, he's not out there with like fish emulsion stinking and, you know, he's not doing any of that. He's walking around grabbing his apples. Oh, it's time for this, you know. And it's lovely. He loves it. He's always this happy guy, and people can read that. And he's running this farm. He's traveling the world because his farm's so easy to run that he pays someone to do it for him. So that's a perfect example of permaculture. And so I would totally use honey locust, and I would actually use the edge here to be capturing all the wind-blown matter. Because the thing is, coming off this initially is you're going to have a lot of dust off the cars. It's going to be gross. So you're going to want to create a windbreak that captures things. So you're going to want to start off with a hardy edge, and then you're going to want to go into a hedgerow. And then under the hedgerow, you're going to want to berm so that the land rises up. So that as that wind hits, it slows down and then hits that berm and gets pushed up. So then you create this area where you have this stillness. Not perfectly still. Well, you guys you don't have to worry about that. You don't have frosts here. So still pockets probably wouldn't bother you. So you take that air out so you don't have this constant buffeting, because then you try to throw down light seeds and then there they go, right? So you want to set up a windbreak first. And then all right, so here's the debate. If you don't have money and you don't have resources, use seeds. Seeds will do the job. And Rosemary Morrow, you guys know Ro? Rosemary Morrow is like a superhero of permaculture. So she's the same age as Bill Mollison, the creator, co-creator of permaculture, except she's a woman. So when she's that age, she's still active, and men are falling apart, right? So she's out like doing this still, and she's been doing it for 40 years. She actually, after Pol Pot was taken out of power in Cambodia, she went in and taught the women how to make food happen. Because the reality is, all the men were the ones who carried that tradition, and they were all killed. All the men with glasses, sorry guys. They were killed by Pol Pot because they could read. And so it was women that were left, and they couldn't send in food because there would be danger. So they said we could send one person in. So they sent Rowan. She went in and taught them how to cook. And this is how to grow food. And this is the reality. This is what's going on. We have people like Jeff Lawton who is getting sent to places in Africa because no one can get aid in. But they send him, and he teaches the people there how to live. And then he leaves, and they're secure. And he can come back 6 months later, and he can see that the children have been being fed. And there's more muscle tone, there's more fat, right? So that's how I know permaculture works, because there's these people out there who are doing this kind of work. And so she said, in the tropics, because things move so fast, the succession moves so fast. So you try to make compost in the tropics, a giant bug will take part of it. And it's so fast, it breaks down so fast, it seems to like turn into air. Yeah, so it's incredibly hard to make compost because it moves so fast. Things break down so fast. The cycles are so fast down in the tropics. So she's saying that we just need to use seeds. And I mean, in so many of my properties that I work on, we could import things, sure, but the seeds are going to do a better job, especially if you inoculate your seeds with nitrogen-fixing like bacteria, like, you know, the inoculant. It's this little dust stuff, this little black dust stuff, and you mix with water and you put your seeds in there. Oh yeah, you guys soak your beans, right? So they go and then yeah, okay, cool. And so I would just literally soak beans, and I would inoculate them, and I would set up berms. And if you could get your wing break right, the berms could be convex, but in the dry climate, because we're actually heading, I mean, we talked about this, these students in back, we talked about how our climate's shifting. If we continue to shift, we're going to be a desert climate, and that means we have to plant desert guilds in order to have Mediterranean guilds in the insides of our systems. Our inner will be Mediterranean rather than our outer being Mediterranean and our inner being more subtropical, right? So concave beds is kind of where we're heading because that retains moisture, right? It goes wicks downward, right? I would put berms and I'd put them on contour, even though this seems like it's flat. It's not flat. You could still set up contour to capture all the rainwater that falls on here. So those berms, the paths for those berms would be all connected, and they wouldn't let out. So whatever falls on the site would go into the berm. Does that make sense? Okay, and then from there, I would use wood chips in your path. I would put cardboard waste down and like paper waste down and newspaper down on your paths. Inoculate it. Make sure it's soaked when you do it. Inoculate it with you could do edible. I inoculate with edible mushrooms in my path, even though you're stepping on it, because guess what? You're gonna see it. You're like, oh wait, that's edible, right? So I do that. I put edible mushrooms in my path. You don't need to do that, but it would be certainly fun and adventurous as you go, right? Tours, pick your own mushrooms. So it actually, do you guys know that mushrooms create water? Mushrooms actually, in the action of the hyphae, when they come, the two spores, and they connect and they reproduce and create a hyphae, and then they connect. As they actually inhabit and take over the substance they're eating, they create water. And this has been proven. So, and then on top of it, how many people know how punky wood is? It's wet, right? It holds tons of water. So if all your wood chips are inoculated with mushrooms, they're going to hold tons more water on top of wood holding water. And if they're edible mushrooms, then you have how many functions there? Well, you're covering up the ground, so you're preventing the water from leaving the ground, and then you're holding more moisture in the ground because of the punkiness, right? And then the fungi is creating it, and so you're actually getting mushrooms out of it. And then it's also for walking, so right? So we're stacking functions. That's what permaculture is. It's all about finding natural functions that you can stack together to get the most advantage out of it. And it takes a lot of like thinking and planning, but it's pretty darn easy and fun. And so it becomes just a problem-solving game for most people. And that's why people get addicted to it. That's why you meet people who are like their lives are completely different and changed and everything by it, because they just say, wait, so I can just change the patterns of my life to be improved? And voila, people do, and then their lives are better. And it really is that simple. We all agree that this is how we go down a highway every time we go down it. The Declaration of Independence started off as words, and then it became a belief, right? So we just have to talk to each other and come up with new systems that we can believe in, so much so that we can change the world around us. And we really can do that. The world around us was not created in a vacuum or created like for us and we were placed in it and told what to do. It may feel that way because a public school did that, right? But that's really not the reality. The reality is we all cooperatively created this system that we have, or the collection of systems that we have, more accurately, right? So we can collectively redesign them. And I truly believe that's where things are headed. We can't have centralized systems anymore. They just don't serve us. The more we centralize, the more we have to reduce. Because when we centralize, that means that a small collection of people have to decide for everyone else. And whenever they have to do that, it's too complicated for them to do that. So they have to reduce it down so it's simple, and then they can handle it. But then it serves no one, and that's why we have, the world we have today. Because instead of making laws that are open-handed that work with us, we have to make new laws every few weeks and then add them to the old laws. And now we have so many laws that I think it's every American has violated at least 2 or 3 federal statutes, right? I think it's every American could be accused of a crime at this point because of that. That's just the way we've designed it, and it's so unreal. It's so stupid. You know what I mean? Like, why don't we just we literally are in a theater with just each other playing games, and we've convinced each other that these games are real, and they're not. They're still games, And we can change the game. We can play a different game, and the result could be something completely different. And and all those things can happen, and all those things can be positive, and we can participate in them. So, all right. So, do we have any other questions? I mean, I can go further on the site. Morrow, Morrow. She is phenomenal. I actually just posted an interview with her. Yeah, this is the one I'm worried about. This is where all the stress is right here. Okay. Well, there's other speakers. Okay.
So let's keep going, and then we're going to take a little break, and people can go to the food truck, go to the restroom, and let's finish here for about 5 minutes, and then we'll fix the tent.
Okay. All right.
What was the name of the movie, the Permaculture movie? I don't know the name of it.
Which one was I talking about?
You just mentioned.
The Permaculture Orchard is a wonderful movie. That's really good. I've got videos on my website, thepermaculturestudent.com. I've got a course. And actually my course, the way I set it up so that people could share the cost. So if you have a neighborhood of people, you could actually just buy the course for your entire neighborhood and just share it. And so that way, like, anyone can buy the course and anyone can use it. Yeah, and it forces people to get involved. You got that. It's community building. So these are my books. This is 20, this is 35. Together they're 50. With these two books, you will get the clear framework of what permaculture is. You will be able to do it on your site, and you'll be able to talk the talk and walk the walk. All right? My website is thepermaculturestudent.com. I'm Matt Powers.
And you're signing your books today.
Yeah, and I'm signing any books that people want to buy. I'll sign them.
First edition.
Yeah, it's the first day I'm self-published, doing it all myself. So, thank you so much for coming out, and thank you so much for caring.
I hope all of you got a bag of cover crop seed. The bag that you're holding, and I know that part of what I'm going to say is probably going to echo some of the things that you heard earlier, but I don't care. You know, the thing that you have to hear things 3 times before you remember them, maybe by the time you leave you'll remember this stuff. This is a selection of cover crop seed that I chose for this land. Now if you look down at your feet, if you're being very kind, you're going to call this soil. I would call it subsoil. This is mineralized, heavy mineralized soil. We have, of course, the lovely sea of stinkwort that has filled the edges around us, which is one of the first colonizer plants that's an exotic invasive that's come in. But we have nothing else here on the land, and when you don't have anything on land, the first things to move in are going to be the obnoxious plants. And stinkwort is definitely in that category. Don't take any seeds home with you. Okay, so you do not want this one in your garden. So there's a little bit of star thistle here. We've actually had several workshops where we've had people come out to try and remove the star thistle. No, I know, it's still here. We don't have, this isn't our land yet. We're still in process of getting all the permits to be able to farm here, but there will not be star thistle, at least on anything that I'm taking care of. The mix that you have in your hands is a combination of 2 main kinds of plants. We've got some barley seed in here, which is a monocot, so it's a grass with a fibrous root system. And there are 3 different kinds of legumes in here. So there's clover, there's bell beans, and there's vetch that's in. The vetch is the real pretty little round seeds. Doesn't it feel good? I love big packages of seed that roll around and feel like that. The reason I chose this collection of seed mix is because on this site, what I'm looking for, I want the seed to be in as soon as possible. I want it germinating. Please let it rain. It was supposed to rain today, and I think we've missed it. But get the seed down, get it to germinate, get those roots moving into the soil. Now, if you flip you back to early botany here, you'll remember that the root system for a monocot is completely different from a root system for a dicot. So two different branches of the plant family. If you remember reaching into the far distant past to yank this out, monocots evolved much more recently than dicots. So their systems are quite different, which is why you can have something like weed and feed and put that on your lawn and have it work. You've got a chemical in there that only works on a dicot, not on a monocot, and vice versa. We have other pesticides that will only kill monocots and won't kill dicots. So again, they're definitely both plants, but they have different systems. Part of that means that if I'm a grass seed, and I germinate and I start to put out my little fibrous root system, off of those roots are going to come the root hairs, which are the microscopic ephemeral little extensions off the root that move into the soil. Root hairs live for a matter of hours to a matter of days. When I said ephemeral, I meant ephemeral. So when these roots move out into the soil, what happens is they leak. And the root hairs leak. What do they leak? They leak carbohydrates. They basically leak sugars into that rhizosphere, which is the area that moves around the root. So every single plant leaks a different flavor of sugars. So a pine tree is going to leak different sugars than a ceanothus. It's going to leak different sugars than a stinkwort, which I'm sure is leaking something. Probably isn't something we want, but it is leaking something. But so every single plant that you put down, then you got this rhizosphere with this sugary coating on it. There are very specific bacteria and fungi that live on that sugar mix. And the bacteria and the fungi, the portfolio of those that lives on the grass seed, that grass fibrous root system, are different from the bacteria and the fungi that are going to live on the system of the vetch. Now the vetches and the other legumes that I put into this mix, I put in part because they do such a wonderful job fixing nitrogen. And I know we had some references to this earlier, but there's a rhizobacterium that's out there that colonizes the roots of legumes. And when the plant sprouts, it lives on the roots and it grabs nitrogen out of the air and it fixes it in the soil. Now it only fixes it in the soil for a given amount of time. Once a plant starts to flower, as soon as it starts to flower and set seeds, reproductive structures are sinks. Some of you have raised children and you know what I'm talking about. The children, the reproductive structures of a plant will strip the resources. They get the lion's share. They get more food than anybody else does. So if you are looking at increasing nitrogen in your soils, which by the way, I've been teaching soil science classes for going on 30 years in Contra Costa County. In that period of time, every one of the classes I teach, people have to do soil tests. Every once in a blue moon, I'll have like one out of several hundred students who has any detectable nitrogen in their soil. Our soils don't need your phosphorus or your potassium. They don't need it. We need nitrogen. We have no nitrogen. We have mineral soils. There's no nitrogen here. So buying your 10-10-10 fertilizer, you're wasting your money on your 2-second 10s. You only need, what we need here is organic material and nitrogen. And organic material and nitrogen. And how much of this do you need? You won't live long enough ever to get enough organic material or nitrogen in, because it oxidizes. In this Mediterranean climate that we have, you put down the compost, you put down the wood chips, you plant the cover crop, we go through a summer, it's gone. I'm sure you've had this experience of filling a bed with compost and you garden for 2 years and you go out and it's like everything vanished. It did. It oxidized and it went away. So you can't buy a mix that means you're going to have the compost here. Our climate doesn't allow that. So composting, mulching, cover cropping, keeping plant material on the soil is a constant issue here. And it's a goal. We absolutely want this to happen. So when you have that cover crop seed in, and I love winter cover crops, summer cover crops are a little bit more complicated because
you usually have to do some kind of irrigation. And unless we start to go into back-to-back El Niños, I have the feeling we're going to be looking at much more expensive water and more limited water supplies for all of us. So I don't tend to do summer cover crops. If I have a bed that needs to remain quiescent for a summer, I just have a 3 or 4 inch layer of mulch over that. But anytime, what you don't want, as a gardener, as a farmer, you do not want bare soil. Because as soon as soil is bare, it's dying. And if you rototill it and leave it bare, it's particularly dying. And again, this is something that was referenced earlier. If you've tilled it, you've hyperoxygenated it, you've fed all those bacteria that were in there, they're breaking down all the organic material rapidly, really rapidly. So you like force-fed oxygen in the soil. That's going to break it down. So you end up, so then you're going to go plant 3 months later. You have killed much of the life in that soil. And if you're going to do chemical fertilizers on top of that, you're just compounding the problem. Of course, what we've done with commercial ag is essentially we're using the soil not as a living medium. We're using the soil as just a support structure. So it's kind of like everything's on life support, and we're feeding everything Ensure and other fake food because we are not trying to create healthy soil systems which support food in a different kind of way. So I know that the world is full of an incredible amount of environmental and ecological bad news. So if you're paying attention, the icebergs are melting, the ocean pH is changing. We never did have winter this past year. I know that you can't say weather's related to climate change, but it seems to me we're getting a little bit warmer. So there's all of this incredibly bad news out there. And one of the things that I find really interesting that doesn't get addressed is there are estimates out there that say we have 43 years of topsoil left on the planet. Not in California, not in the United States, planet-wide. We have no topsoil, we got no crops, we've got no agronomy, we are going to have to more than double our food supply by 2050. How are we going to do that without topsoil? Well, I can't do much of anything about huge acreage of land being planted in soybeans in the middle of the United States, but I can really take responsibility for my place. And I can make sure that I have something growing on the ground all the time, because when I have things growing in the ground constantly, those sugars are leaking out there. Those bacteria and those fungi are in there. They are sequestering carbon. I know it's on the short-term basis. I don't care. It's the best I can do. I'm not doing the biochar. I'm not going to be doing the things that might make a huge difference. I can plant cover crop. Now this seed will get planted. It'll get planted this weekend. I was asked what kind of density. It's really up to you. It depends on how much of a space you have. If you've got a 4 by 8 foot bed that you just yanked your tomatoes out of, you probably don't want to dump the whole pound there. It would be a little bit crowded. I tend to do it sort of like scattering powdered sugar on a cake. So I would scatter my seed. When we do it here, I'm going to have X number of pounds per acre that go down. So what are my goals here? I already mentioned I want biomass. So I want the physical structure of the plant, and I want the nitrogen fixing capacity that's here. This soil is so compacted. I want roots that'll go down in so that I've got a way for water to actually get banked into the soil a little bit deeper, because right now it's going to puddle and run right off into Walnut Creek and Grayson Creek right here. So I'm creating that sponge. That's a little bit optimistic. It's not going to be a sponge after one season of cover crop, but I'm doing things to encourage the development of sponge soil that holds water, that holds nutrients. Everything in my yard and what will happen here, nothing here goes to flower and nothing goes to seed. I am not interested in growing and saving seed for cover crop on this land. This will be in here and it'll be mowed or rolled down when it's sometime in February or March. And then we would want to plant over the top of that. So you can seed directly into that mulch. So in other words, you cut down the plants lay on top of the ground, you plant directly into that. And if that happens in February, you're in perfect time for your spring crops. So you could do the sugar snap peas, you can do all of the lettuce plants, the maca, chicories, all of those plants can go directly into that mulch, into your beds. Then come summertime, those 3 or 4 months down the road, you've harvested all those salad crops because they've come up, they've done their thing. Then your soil temperatures, when they get warm enough, you plant your tomatoes. So you don't have a huge amount of biomass keeping the soil cool, because tomatoes, squash, peppers, eggplant should not be planted until your soil temperature is running around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's down 3 inches. And if you don't own a soil thermometer, be ashamed of yourselves as gardeners and go get one. Because the soil temperature is crucial for an awful lot of plants. And some years, I have not been able to put tomatoes. I live at the foot of Mount Diablo. There have been years when I haven't been able to get my tomatoes into the ground until like the second week of June. So I kept moving them up into a bigger container and a bigger container, like 5-gallon pots are going into the ground now, but the soil was too cold. So like, what's the big deal? When your roots go into cold soil, it dwarfs the plant and they become much more susceptible to disease. So I don't want to have sick plants. So I will wait till the soil temperature is right to plant things, and I'm really picky about that. And I yell at all my students about that too. Don't plant things if it's cold. I say, it needs to be cold enough that you can sit bare-bottomed on the ground for 20 minutes without complaining. Do not do this in your front yard. Especially don't do it in your front yard and tell people that I told you to do this. So I would like to have in my soil always something growing on it, because anything that's growing on it, including the stinkweed, is supporting some kind of biome that's down here. What would happen on this land if we did nothing? Is the stinkwort that's out there is going to grow and it'll reseed and it'll come back. But every single time it dies down, you have a little bit more organic material, a little bit richer soil. So as things start to develop here, we would end up with other things coming in that would not be this horrible invasive stinkwort. Eventually it would make the land uncomfortable for itself. I don't think I want to live that long to have to be that patient. So my part of what I will do here is seed very densely, so that when the cover crop comes up, it outcompetes the weed seeds that are in the soil. So cover crop, if you have a weed problem that you're trying to deal with, scatter heavily, because it will outcompete the weeds that would come up. We were just talking before I came up here about bindweed. Unfortunately, if you have bindweed roots down many, many, many feet into the soil. You will not get rid of bindweed using cover crops, except that bindweed hates shade. So if you plant very densely, it creates a shaded environment, and you're going to at least significantly reduce the number of bindweed seedlings that come up. So it helps with weed seeds. It helps with water percolation into the soil. You are creating biomass. You are not supporting insects with this because we're not allowing this to flower. So I had somebody ask me if the cover crop plants would be things that would help with the honeybee problem. No, that's not going to be a benefit of this situation. I mean, there are plenty of other plants I would recommend that you put in to help the honeybees. But for a winter cover crop, what I'm really looking at with this mix is nitrogen fixation and biomass and weed control. So those are the three main goals for the mix that you have. So anybody have specific questions about the mix? Because I could go on about cover crops for a long time. Did I talk about carbon? Yes, I did. I mentioned it. But with cover crops, you don't get a lot of carbon because it's short term, because the carbon that's fixed in is in those sugars that are around the rhizosphere. However, if you keep doing this and you keep adding up, it's like it's a little step. It's a little step, but it is one little step that you can all do. Shannon, am I going to do any soil prep here? I will take every ounce of compost that anybody would like to give me, and we're going to be getting in a lot of wood chips. The wood chips I'm hoping will have inoculated with oyster mushroom fungi, so that'll break down fairly rapidly. Whether they fruit or not is irrelevant. We'll rip once. We'll rip once because this soil was deliberately compacted so that it wouldn't erode off into the creeks. So they came through, and this site has been pretty seriously compacted. I won't rototill. I'll rip once, apply compost, apply wood chips, and cover crops. One of what? I'll do. I want to do 12. I want to do a 12-inch rip here. And for those of you who don't know, rototilling is a lot like taking an egg beater to the soil. So they're blades that move like this, and when you do an egg beater in the soil, or when you whip up egg whites, you get a very, you're working all that air into there. It's exactly what rototilling does to dirt. So for me to rototill this would actually cause more damage. Ripping is a matter of literally having blades that go up and down. Yes? Yes, ripping and disking are very similar. The question was, is ripping the same as disking? And yes, it is. So what you're doing is you're cutting into the soil. We would want to cut in so that we're actually providing a way for the compost that we'll be applying on top of that to move down into that soil profile, which will help break up. I'm only planning on doing that one time. From that point on, it should happen with organic material applied to the top of the soil, and hopefully we have created that microbiome that will continue to work for us to create better and better soil every season that we go through here. So this is not unlike somebody moving into a brand new development where they've come in and scraped off every single bit of remote topsoil. So if you've ever been in somebody's yard, they come in and they pour down like a 1/4 inch of compost, roll out the sod on top of that, plant about 20 agapanthus or something equally silly alongside with that, and then call it a garden. The problem is the people who buy that house don't know that there's no soil there. So then the plants all start. I've made lots of money in my life in places like Black Hawk. Why are all my plants dying? You have no soil, So what's the answer to that? Well, to steal something from Steve Andrews, from those of you who've heard him talk, the answer to everything in the world is compost, 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 mulch, mulch, mulch. I would add into that chickens, but that's my own bias because chickens and chicken manure and chickens eat weeds beautifully. I've looked at this site and thought, how many chickens would I need to bring out here to rototill the entire place for me? But so I do want to talk about a little bit more about cover crops, in that different cover crops can be used almost medicinally. So one of the things, again, what I first am chosen here are the plants that give me a grass. So I've got the legume root system, and grasses and legumes. So the grass with a fibrous root system, legume with a deeper root system. The second cover crop I would put in here the next year would be tillage radishes. So that for those of you who know about tillage radishes, the root goes down 24 inches plus. When you behead those, so when you come in and you do your February mow down on those, that whole root system biodegrades down into the soil. So it does the equivalent of rototilling with a biological agent rather than a mechanical agent. So again, you are feeding the bacteria, you're feeding the fungi, you're creating more of a organic system that can go in there. And I'm not talking using organic as in no pesticide. I'm using organic as in it didn't come in bags. It's a living system. So there are lots of other composts or living composts that can go in that will have been used medicinally. For those of you who pay attention to the chemical information, you know that methyl bromide is a chemical that is used extensively in row crops, particularly in strawberries in the coastal areas. It's a horrible greenhouse gas. I mean, it's one of the most destructive of the greenhouse gases. Unfortunately, it works really well. So they'll tent over the whole field and pump the methyl bromide in. It seeps into the soil and it kills an enormous number of pathogens. Strawberries are a very vulnerable crop. They get absolutely everything. If anything is going to kill a plant, strawberries get it. It's like, so they've got the fungi and they got the bacteria and they've got the viruses, and it's like, if you grow strawberries and the snails don't get them first, I'm in honor. But field cropping in particular is difficult. So you got a monoculture of something like strawberries. They cover it and they blast it with methyl bromide once a year. Dr. Clyde Elmore at UC Davis did a very fabulous research study that looked at taking broccoli is frequently grown in the same areas where strawberries are grown. And when they harvest the heads out, the whole plant is left there as a waste event. Dr. Clyde Elmore discovered that if you take, and it doesn't matter which brassica, so broccoli is a member of the brassica family, they went through and they cut down what was essentially a waste product from the brassica fields, moved it over to the strawberry fields, tarped that in. You ever know kids who won't eat cabbage member families, Brussels sprouts? Only kids. I'm sure all of you eat these with great delight. But all the brassicas have a certain amount of sulfur compounds in them. And children often have very, very sensitive palates and they're responding to those sulfur compounds. Well, it so happens that if you take those brassica leaves and you chop them up and you put them on a strawberry field and you cover them with a plastic tarp, they release a lot of those sulfur compounds into the soil, and they are as effective at killing pathogens as methyl bromide is. So really good research that's come out, very exciting research for me. So it's using a plant that's growing right here. The next field over could be moved in, worked in, breaks down. It isn't magical thinking. There's the science behind which chemicals are in the brassicas that break down. So it's completely research based. It isn't woo-woo, although it feels a little woo-woo when you say just chop up your broccoli leaves and put them in. But it is one of the reasons why were I to do a second crop on here next winter, it would be a brassica. So turnips are in that family. The tillage turnips are in that family. Could I eat the tillage turnips? I would not. They're really, really hot. I mean, they're nasty hot. So I would not want to be, they would not be human food. They would be soil food. But there are many different products that can go in. Crimson clover is beautiful. It's a wonderful flowering winter annual. That's in this mix. Fava beans, if you want to do fava beans, the problem is, again, if you want to eat the fava beans, then it is no longer a cover crop because your nitrogen will have been pulled out of the soil and is now in the flowers and in the beans of the favas. I like fava beans. I always grow a bed of fava beans that I'm going to eat, but they're not the cover crop. Vetch is perfectly reasonable to put in as a cover crop. If you are going to do vetch as a cover crop, please make sure you've not let it go to seed. You will never get rid of it. So it's another one of the ones you want to make sure that it gets mowed down before it sets seed. I've been asked, is there something unique or different? Could dandelions be a cover crop? The problem with using a plant like a dandelion is they go to seed if you blink at them twice. So you're not going to be able to get to that point of having the biomass without having the plant go immediately into sequestering the nitrogen in its seed and its flowers. Other things that cover crops have been used for, so they're used to break up soil, they're used to increase biomass, they're used to sequester nitrogen in the soil, they're used to sequester carbon in the soil, they're used to increase biological activity. So you have different, again, you want the diversity of plants. If you're just doing crimson clover, you're limiting yourself. You really would like to have at least 2 plant families in any kind of cover crop mix that you put in. So I was just asked if I would use this cover crop seed mix to go in a place where somebody's let a lawn go dormant, which many of us have done. I will tell you, I was down in Bakersfield earlier this summer, and I got news for you. I was in there more green lawns than any place I've been in years. I was like, oh my goodness. I'm going home to look at brown lawns, and Bakersfield is solid green, and it's the complete desert. Anyway. If you have a spent lawn, if you've allowed your lawn to go dry this winter, if you put this seed mix down, it depends on what you wanted to do with that. Let's say that you've decided that you really are going to let the lawn go completely. You're not going to replace it with turf. If you put down this and you did the same thing in February, you were to cut this down, probably mulch over that with wood chip mulch and then plant through that with your I mean, we have 2 windows for planting here. So if you're replacing your lawn with a drought-tolerant landscape, the optimal time is October. So this is the best time for planting because it is going to rain, right? It is going to rain. So the other second best time is February, March. So if you were to do a cover crop and then look at, again, cutting that down and planting into that in February, March with a mix, that would be very good. So I was asked about compost. Cover crop is, you could plant it, you could compost and then put your cover crop on top of that, but you don't really have to. So if you are looking at having a rich compost area, the reason you want to keep the soil covered. So let's say you've had a bed full of tomatoes that you've just taken out because they're all look pretty pathetic right now, and you decided you were sick of looking at pathetic plants, and so you cut them all down. It's a really good idea anytime you turn a bed over to put about 3 or 4 inches of compost on top of that bed before you plant again. So that's just because, again, we have this Mediterranean climate. Everything's going to have oxidized out. There is no limit. I mean, there isn't a point where you can be adding too much compost. Now, that is not true everywhere. There are lots of places in the United States where you can't do that because it rains. They have this thing called water that comes from the sky. We are so dry here so much of the time that compost disappears. The organic material, doesn't disappear, but it oxidizes down to very basic humic acids. So compost is a constant. I've never understood why people want to get rid of leaves or get rid of grass clippings, or I don't understand it, because if you live here and you garden here, you need every single bit of everything you can get to go into the soil, because our soil just has zero. Most of Contra Costa County has less than 0.02% organic matter in the soil. So we have almost no organic matter in the soil, and we have no nitrogen in the soil. So the 2 things you absolutely want to increase however you can would be SOM, the soil organic matter, and nitrogen. Compost is a great way to do that for soil organic matter. Composts tend to be low nitrogen. So compost is not an excellent nitrogen source, and I have talked to many people over the years who are like, I don't need to feed my plants, I'm giving them compost. And it's like, you really need to check your soil and find out what your nitrogen level is. It's a pretty simple test to do. If you're going to do the soil testing, there are lots of labs around here that'll do that for you. But the Lamont soil test kits are relatively inexpensive, and if you get 1 kit, you can do like 500 tests with it. So you can check pretty regularly. But you really ought to be checking to find out. Compost is not a nitrogen source. Really important thing to think about. Now, can I be wrong about that? Oh yeah. If you are doing a whole bunch of coffee grounds in your compost, coffee grounds, not old coffee. Coffee grounds are a neutral source of nitrogen. They're not acidic. The acid is leached out into the coffee. So if you are adding coffee grounds thinking that you're lowering pH, you're not. So you want to get those coffee grounds into your mix because it's a really good source of nitrogen. The other thing is that you're going to have very happy worms. Earthworms love coffee grounds. And for those of you who, I want to come back in my next life as a worm. All they do in life is eat and have sex. I mean, that's it. I mean, there's no other existence for a worm. So it's like, this is not bad. This is, you think, oh, I'm going to come back. No, this is a great life. You give them coffee grounds, then you've got wired worms. They're even having a happier time in your compost pile. So adding coffee grounds is excellent. I mean, you should never go buy a pizza or Starbucks without running in to see if you can get those coffee grounds to take home. Excellent thing to put into your compost pile. Excellent thing to put underneath citrus. Old cold coffee is also excellent to pour citrus. Old tea, great to pour underneath citrus too, because that's one of the plants that is in many of our gardens and many of our yards, and it likes a more acidic pH than our soils have. So our soils tend to be basic. Not in all of Contra Costa County. Contra Costa County has over 30 different distinct soil types. This is not Kansas. It's also not Modesto. You go in the Central Valley, you're much more likely to find. I have lots of students who will do look at the soil web map and discover they have 3 different soils in their front yard. And it explains why when you plant something here it does fine, and you plant the same plant over 50 feet and it dies. You've got different kinds of, so we have so much diversity here. Contra Costa has been folded and whipped and origamied, and this area, the soil is incredibly complex. I'm teaching soils next semester. Come to DVC if you want to do a whole semester on soils. But there's just it's such a interesting topic, because you can literally have different soil texture from your front yard to your backyard to your side yard. So different amount of sand, silt, and clay, different levels of compaction, different levels of micronutrients that are in there. Depends. I mean, sometimes people are lucky enough to have one consistent soil front to back, but then it's probably Montmorillonite Clear Lake clay, and that has its own enormous headaches that go along with it. Or Oakley, where you're in pure sand. So we've got everything that's here in this county. So what you want to do, if you're going to do, again, regardless of the kind of soil though, your goal is to keep something growing on that soil 12 months out of the year. And not something that you're going to let go to seed, but something that you can then cut down to increase the biomass level. So buying compost will achieve the same kind of thing, but buying compost doesn't create that living microbiome in the soil that I'm really trying to encourage. That's a question. The question is, how do you keep birds from running off with your cover crop seed? Guns, cats. What I will do in my yard is I will often have like a bag of sand that I'll sprinkle over the top, or I'll take handfuls of compost. I would like the seed to not be visible. The problem is that the smaller seed, like the clover, is light obligatory. It has to have light on it in order to germinate. If you can time it so that you could scatter the seed just before a rain event, it'll have a chance to germinate, and once it starts to germinate, you're going to lose some to birds. That's pretty much a given, unless you have a bird-proof yard, and I've not found any of those that work very well. Yes. So Nadine was saying that asking about putting rice straw over the seeds to sort of bank those down. You be very careful and make sure you're doing that it is rice straw, because if you were to, she was being very specific about what she recommended there, because you do not want to go to one of the feed and grain stores and get a bale of hay. You will hate me, because every weed seed in that is going to germinate. So you want to get rice straw that's weed free. And that can go down as a cover also to prevent birds from coming in. That's a good idea. Yes. So Shannon was saying that she covers it with wire, and chicken wire will work that way. If you are only doing cover crop in a bed, it's very common in my experience that people don't do much winter gardening, which is a real shame here, because you actually get far more mass from a winter garden than you do from a summer garden, and summer gardens take all that water. So, and the water and the effort that goes in. So you should be planting all the kales and the lettuces and, the cabbages and all those things. Your garden ought to be full of those now, but many people don't. Many people will do a summer garden that's zucchini and tomatoes and a few basil plants, and that's their garden, right? If they're harvested those things out, you've lost the squash already. They've already got powdery mildew, so you had to yank those. But your tomatoes and peppers are probably still bearing, although the tomatoes look pretty pathetic. So they're about to come out. What you don't want to do is have that dirt just sit there. So putting anything in as a cover crop is a great idea. You could use mustard. Just scatter packets of mustard seed. The comment from the peanut gallery there in back was the mustard rocks. Red mustard is also beautiful. If you haven't grown red mustard, it's as pretty as any ornamental that you could possibly put in. So even if you don't like to eat it, it's a really good thing to put into the garden and let grow, and it's fun to look at, and it tolerates the cold, and you feel good about it, and you look at it and go, I'm cover cropping the soil and feeding the bacteria and the fungi, so I'm a good gardener. So any other questions? Yes. So I was asked if I can explain the difference between tilling, disking, rototilling, turning in, ripping, double digging. What do all these different terminology mean? Rototilling is a process, again, of taking that egg beater to the soil. So you have curved blades that are basically whipping the soil structure, usually not going down more than about 6 inches. What happens when you do that is you create a froth on top of the ground that has destroyed the soil structure, has killed most of the macroorganisms that are in the soil. You've shredded all your worms, and even if they're cut in half, they do not regenerate body parts, contrary to urban myth. But so you've created something that looks good and it smells great, because when you rototill, you've kicked up all those actinomycetes in the soil and they smell wonderful. But it's a terrible thing to do. Absolutely horrible thing to do. And it's horrible when they're doing it in fields too. Whether you're rototilling your own backyard or you're tilling up fields, it's bad behavior. And we know better. We've got 60, 70 years of research saying this is not what should be done, but it's really hard to change patterns. Just really hard to change patterns. My family are farmers, I know. So I'm going to try and finish this one first. So we've got rototilling and tractoring are very much the same kind of thing that'll happen. Ripping and disking is a process of taking blades that cut down into the soil. When you are cutting vertically down into the soil, what you're doing is hopefully breaking up a shallow hard pan. So in this soil here where we've got 6 foot of fill, I'm not anticipating going any deeper than about 18 inches here, and that may take several runs across, and we have to wait till the soil's moist to do that. You're not going to be able to get anything into soil when it's this hard and dry. Ripping or disking you could also do with a shovel. So if you are taking a shovel and you're doing the double digging process, that's much the same. Double digging is where you take off one lump of soil, like from a shovelful, and then you go down a second shovelful and you pull that on top. So you start at one end of a bed and you're flipping like this. What happens in soil structure is there's a zone of alluviation that happens in soil where minerals are washed down. So they're washed out of what's called the O, or the A horizon layer. O is right at the very top, A is the next one down. Then you get into zone E, which is where a lot of the nutrients tend to get sort of stuck, especially in heavy soils. Doesn't happen in sand, but in heavier soils it's there. So when you flip it, you're taking those nutrients that got washed down to the E layer and you're moving them up on top. So if you double dig soil once, add lots of compost to it, plant in it, you should never have to do that again if you are continuing to add compost or cover crops that are in there. So that if you don't let that soil you don't walk on it when it's wet, you don't run something heavy over it, you don't stand on it, you are nice to your soil. Incorporating is usually done with a pitchfork. And so the question is, if you're taking a pitchfork into the soil or double digging, are you destroying soil structure? You can't. One shovelful at a time. You're not going through like you are mechanically with a tiller, and whipping it. It's kind of like, let's see, taking the fork and blending something in a bowl versus taking the egg beater and whipping it. So yes, you are moving organic material deeper into that soil. I'm a really lazy gardener. I mean, there just is a limit to how much time I have in the world, and I'm a firm believer ripping or double digging once, and from that point on it's composted and stuff that I put on top. And I don't incorporate anything after the first time that I loosen a compacted soil. From that point on, I am hoping that the earthworms and all the other critters that are down there are doing my work for me, which in a healthy ecosystem is what should be happening. So nature didn't design anything except for feral pigs to rip up soil. And feral pigs do rip up soil and they're awful. So I think I'm out of time, right? Yes. So the question is, if you've tilled something once and added animal manure to that, is it ruined? No. I have to ask you, is this something that you do all the time? Do you till every year? You did it one time? One time does not a disaster make. The organisms will return, the bacteria, the fungi, the earthworms will return, especially if you have that plant material with those leaky roots that are out there that are leaking the sugars into the soil. Everybody will come back. The biggest problem is in soils, and you all know what I'm talking about, where the way they do weed control is they rototill twice or 3 times a year. And they've been doing it for 40 years and trying to persuade those people that they're damaging the earth rather than doing something good. It's a little bit like vacuuming a carpet. You know, when you rototill, it's all clean. It's all flat and it's all clean and it does smell so good. It's really hard to believe that it damages anything. So I would say cover crop. Get your seeds growing out there and things will heal. So you're welcome.
Thank you so much. So one of the reasons that we decided to throw this event is I heard the Marin Carbon Project talk about putting a 1/2 inch of compost on grange lands, and that Berkeley scientists proved that it sequestered 1 metric ton of carbon per acre if they put a 1/2 inch of compost on the grange lands. And they all thought it would fall off after the first year. And I have the graphs on my phone if anyone wants to see it. But it kept going and going and going. And 5 years later, it was still sequestering almost 1 metric ton of carbon because the microbes in the soil were so happy they replicated and did all the work that they're doing. And so it became a carbon sink. And so I became fascinated with this whole question of carbon sinking, which is why I've asked each one of our speakers to talk about sequestering carbon, because as far as I know, our soil and sequestering carbon in our soil is the only way to reverse climate change. Otherwise, it's going to go into our oceans and cause acidification. We all know the bad outcomes of that. So our next speaker is Mike McGill, the president of Central San, who is one of our biggest donors, also our biggest supporter from the beginning. And every time we run out of money, he refills that's not quite true. Anyway, Mike is going to talk about recycled water because this entire project started with recycled water. And it's the one thing he's going to forget to say is fill your 300-gallon tank to the top, because the sloshing is what knocks over your truck.
I only wish it was true that I didn't replenish the pot every time it kind of ran out. But yes, I am Mike McGill. I'm board president here at Central Contra Costa Sanitary District. Board members are elected in the greater sanitary district area. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through where our boundaries are. My day job, I'm a civil engineer, licensed civil engineer. My expertise is water resources and municipal engineering. Central San did provide the bags of seeds you're picking up today, so I want to thank Central San for that. And Roger Bailey was here earlier. Thank you. There's also all sorts of literature that keeps blowing off the table over there, but feel free to take a look and see if there's anything useful, as well as recycled bags for your grocery shopping. My business cards are over there. I'm not going to really take questions at the end of my talk, and I'm not going to talk about carbon sinking. I'm going to really only talk about recycled water. And the other thing I was supposed to do was go through our sponsors and key partners and all those things, but in the interest of time, please take just a few minutes and look at your program and look at all those people and organizations and agencies, because we do really want to thank them all. Relative to recycled water, and Carolyn said this right in the beginning, we have now someplace between 30 and 35 million gallons a day of water that comes into our plant and we process. The number used to be much higher than that, and that's dry weather flow. During periods of heavy rain, if anybody remembers heavy rain, flows can get much higher, and they can get up to as high as 200 million gallons a day. Right now, most of our treated wastewater, and we treat it fully, it goes through biological treatment, secondary processing, gets disinfected with ultraviolet light, and then gets discharged into Sassoon Bay. And my passion is we need to find a way to use every drop of our processed water, turn it into valuable recycled water, and not be dumping it into the bay. And one of the reasons Central San went ahead and sponsored this farm project, and we're very appreciative of Carolyn Finney and Eglantis, is we're trying to call attention to the value of this resource we have here. I know Federal Glover, Supervisor Glover, and many people in Contra Costa County would love to see a whole range of greenhouses along this northern waterfront. There are permitted use in industrial areas, and they'd love to see us use recycled water for that. So we're promoting that. We're in the process, we're currently undertaking a major study on how can we wholesale our recycled water. And it ranges from making it available to the refineries on either side of us. It includes making it available to East Bay Mud, Contra Costa Water District. We're even looking at the possibility of running it all the way out into Central Valley. The city of Modesto has just put in a new advanced wastewater treatment plant, and they're doing it to make recycled water available for Central Valley agricultural efforts. Certainly Monterey and Salinas already use a great deal of recycled water for their agricultural use. So my focus, my passion is the productive reuse of recycled water. I thank all of you for coming out. Please spread the word. You're welcome to come if you live in our service area to pick up recycled water. We're making it available for contractors. So with that, pick up one of my business cards if you have any questions, and hopefully I'm getting us back on schedule.
So where and how do you get this?
You get this water about a quarter of a mile to our west. As you come in Imhoff Drive, and the road you pulled off of here is Imhoff Drive. Well, there's a road over there that has our big fountain in front of it, and our headquarters office building, which then also has the operations center for our wastewater treatment plant over there. And when you drive over there, you'll see signs for the recycled water. And I said earlier, you can come and get 300 gallons. I've been noticing some of the tanks might be a little bigger than 300 gallons, so don't push it too far, but make as many trips as you want a day. The water is right now full of nitrogen and phosphorus and all the other things that are good for agricultural use. It meets all the state standards. It's got all the permits needed for you to use in your home gardens. And to use on farms like this. So I hope you appreciate and love this water. Okay, question. Okay, the comment was her husband picks up the water every Saturday morning for the last 3 months, and her roses love it. Yeah, the plants do absolutely love it. Using it for ornamental irrigation probably isn't the highest and best use, but this drought caught a lot of people by surprise. And you want to protect your gardens, you want to protect your trees, and we want to help you do that. And over time, given if this drought continues and the climate change continues and we don't have our snowpack, the highest and best use will probably be productive agriculture and industrial use. Carolyn?
So one of the things that Mike didn't tell you that I like to say is that over 1 trillion gallons of water that could be recycled and reclaimed is dumped into the Greater Bay Area waterways every year. And just to let you know how much water that is, that's half the shortfall in the Central Valley. According to UC Davis, the shortfall was 2.1 trillion. We threw that water away. Part of the reason that this farm is so important is to demonstrate moving our agriculture as much as possible back into urban areas, especially next to the recycled water facilities. And so this is a landmark project. As far as we know, no one else in the country has ever done this. So we really thank Central San for that, and thank Mike McGill. If Mike McGill hadn't just argued for this from the beginning, we wouldn't be here today. Okay, our next speaker is Andrew Sullivan. Andrew Sullivan is a statewide expert on integrated pest management and is going to help us get rid of these weeds. And please don't leave, because we want him to have come all this way and have a nice audience. Yes, what is your question? Oh, yes. The water is 99.99% the same as potable water. There are large molecules in the water from shampoo and drugs that people throw down the drain, but plants cannot take up large molecules. So humans can, and large mammals can. That's why we can't drink the water. Of course, if there was an earthquake and that's all you could get, I'd probably be drinking it. But as long as you use it on your garden, and then if you're trained in using the recycled water, they'll tell you just wash the lettuce off, but that's because you're just washing off the large molecules that are on the surface. The plant cannot absorb the slight molecular difference between that and potable water. And it's actually better for your garden because it's neutral pH and high in nitrogen and phosphorus, so you get organic fertilizer. And I'm sure Andrew will tell us more that we need to know. And Andrew lives in Martinez, so we are extremely fortunate to have him nearby.
We're gonna talk about IPM. I already got some questions from some of you guys. What is IPM? We're gonna answer that question, but it's a lot of fun. It's talking about managing pests, and let's face it, we all have pests, whether we're talking about home, garden, landscape, on your pet, whatever the case may be. We all have pests. Carolyn mentioned that I was going to talk about weeds. I'm actually an entomologist, so I'm not qualified to talk about anything that has less than 6 legs. So we're going to talk about insects, and then I'll also get into mollusks later. All right. Okay, so I'm an urban IPM advisor for the University of California's Cooperative Extension Program. And some of you may be asking, what exactly is that? You know, we have farm advisors, and I think those of us engaged in agricultural commodity production are very familiar with farm advisors. They're on the ground, they're helping our commodity producers solve problems, and they're connected to the universities. You know, the idea of extension is that the research that happens up in the ivory tower needs to get translated and transferred down to the industries that need that technology, need those answers to their problems. I'm the very first of these advisors to specifically serve urban pest management professionals. And so the university appointed me in 2002. I serve 5 counties on the ground, but I'm also part of the UC IPM statewide program. So show of hands, who's ever been to the UC IPM website? All right, that's great. So we have about 40% of the audience. That means the rest of you have some homework to do. This is the most widely accessed IPM website in the world, and it's developed right here within our UC system. So again, I mentioned that I work with pest management professionals primarily, and what I do is I provide an applied research program as well as education and outreach, and the idea is to help them manage key urban pests by developing new tactics and new strategies. All right? Okay. So this is one of the biggest messages of this talk is, what is IPM? I think the term is thrown out a lot. It's thrown around a lot, I should say, and different folks have different definitions. You know, so some folks consider that IPM means we aren't using pesticides, or perhaps IPM means that we're only using reduced risk pesticides or something like that. And IPM is actually a decision-making process. Okay, so it's a way that we decide how to manage pests, and of course pests do need to be managed a lot of times below unacceptable levels, but when we do that, we'd like to minimize the negative impacts that we might have on our communities and on the environment. All right, so this is an informal setting, and if anyone has a question during the presentation, I'm open to that. I hope this is eye-opening for you guys a little bit, but that's all IPM is. So if somebody stops you on the street and says, hey, what's IPM? It's a decision-making process. It helps us manage pests below unacceptable levels while minimizing negative impacts on the community and the environment. That's all it is. Okay, so IPM was actually developed for agricultural systems. Why is it important in urban areas? Why is the university interested in extending IPM messages and tools to urban areas? Well, this may surprise you, but our urban surface waters, and that includes our creek and canal systems as well as our storm drain systems, are up to 3 times as contaminated by pesticide active ingredients than our agricultural tailwaters. So agricultural tailwater is that water that's coming right out of a production area. We often think, oh, that's full of all kinds of excess nutrients and pesticides. The creek behind your home may actually contain 3 times the level of things like insecticides, herbicides, fungicides. And a lot of that has to do with what I consider to be unnecessary pesticide applications in urban areas. You know, so a lot of us have pest control contracts with contractors, and we get regular services. And the idea is that we're protecting our home from invasion. But what's happening is we're applying residues of pesticides to impervious surfaces. So you think about all of the hardscape, all the concrete that we have in our urban areas, and those residues just sit there until we have a rain event, or even worse, when someone's hosing down their driveway or washing their car, and those materials move with the water, they move with sediment, and they end up in our urban surface water systems. And a lot of times they can disrupt the food web there. You know, and the aquatic food systems depend on the invertebrates. If you're a fisherman, you know, you're interested in the big fish, but those big fish, they got big on smaller fish and other organisms, and those small fish got big, relatively, on the invertebrates that are there. So if we disrupt that system, it can have hugely negative impacts. I think it's important for us to consider professional versus residential use of pesticides in our urban areas. Professionals are required to use what we call personal protective equipment. So that means they have face masks, they have gloves, they have coveralls, and they're very visible. When they're making those applications, they're very visible. It's easy for us to point a finger and say, oh, you know, you're contaminating my environment, you're making this pesticide application, but the same active ingredients in those professional products are available to us on the shelves of our retail establishments. And the general public, our residential public, we're not required to report our pesticide use, all right? We're not required to wear personal protective equipment, and we're certainly not aware of the proper way to dispose of these materials. So I think it's important to realize that when you see a professional making an application and you point the finger, you have 3 fingers pointing back at you, all right? So take a look in your garage and you'll see what I mean. So the way I teach IPM is like this. It's, again, a decision-making process, and it's cyclical. It starts with education. Anytime you have a particular pest that you need to manage, you learn about the biology, the ecology, and you identify weak points in that life cycle, and you start to arm yourself with an intelligent system to manage that pest. Likewise, if you don't know what pest you may encounter, you learn about the system you're trying to protect. Is it your home? Is it your garden? And learn about what kinds of pests may occur. That's education as well, all right? After you've educated yourself a bit, the very next step that comes before all management tactics is prevention. Is there a way that we can prevent this pest from becoming a problem in the first place? You know, if we're worried about subterranean termites, perhaps there's a way we can construct our homes where it makes it more difficult for the termites to gain access to structural wood. All right. If we're worried about a particular pest on crops, maybe we can plant at a certain time of the year when the pest density is lower. There are all kinds of ways, depending on the pest system, that we can prevent pests before they're a problem in the first place. Next, we have monitoring. If you're not monitoring for pests, you're not practicing IPM. Monitoring tells you whether or not pests are present or absent. It also tells you if pest density is increasing or decreasing. Now, monitoring can be very informal. So perhaps you work in your garden every Saturday and you pay attention to the weed species and the life stage that those weeds are at, and you keep track of that. That's monitoring. Or it can be very specific. So if you're managing codling moth or citrus leaf miner, they make pheromone traps, which only catch that particular organism. And, you know, you may set those out on a regular basis and keep track of how many moths did I catch this week compared to next week, compared to the following week. That's a monitoring program. It tells you what's happening with the pest population. If you don't have that idea, then you cannot make intelligent decisions about pest management. Next, IPM has this idea of thresholds. Now, thresholds are an agricultural idea, and the idea is that we can tolerate some level of pest density before we have loss, whether it's economic loss, aesthetic loss, whatever your system requires. There's some level of pest density at which we will not encounter any loss. All right? We won't know if we're here or not unless we have a monitoring program and unless we have information to tell us what this number may be, if it's an agricultural system. All right? But always, when that level gets reached, we must take action. So IPM, we're monitoring. Yes, the pest is present. No, it's not at the threshold yet. As soon as that threshold is reached, we take action. And this threshold really depends on the system. It depends on the pest. So I'll give you an example. The threshold for ants in the garden is much higher than the threshold for ants in the kitchen. All right? The threshold for Argentine ants, which are a nuisance, is much higher than the threshold for fire ants, which are a potential public health threat. Okay? So that moves all over the place. And it also may be an individual difference. All right? So your threshold for aphids on your salad greens may be higher than your neighbor's. And keep that in mind when you invite them over for dinner. All right? In all cases, when the threshold is reached, we must take action. IPM dictates that we use multiple tactics. You cannot integrate one tactic. It doesn't integrate, you see? So if you're only using biological control, you're only releasing ladybird beetles, that's not IPM. If all you're doing is hand pulling weeds, that's not IPM. IPM says we need to have multiple tactics working together to solve the problem, all right? Then we have this idea of integration. It's very connected to the multiple tactics. If we have a biological control program where we have a predator or a parasite helping to manage a pest, and then we apply a broad spectrum pesticide, many of which are reduced risk, some of them are even organic, we may interfere with that process going on, the natural enemies that are there. So that's disintegration. That's the lack of integration in our system. Finally, we have an evaluation component. You ask yourself, what did I do that worked? What did I do that didn't work so well? What am I going to do next time I encounter this pest? And this cycle is never ending. We don't talk about pest control, we talk about pest management. Pest control is put out a fire. That's not a real-world situation. The real-world situation is pests are constantly pressuring our commodities, our bodies, our pets, our homes, and we need to manage them rather than control them. Okay, so let's go a little deeper into this idea of multiple tactics. The way that IPM thinks about multiple tactics is that they should be used in a series of escalating force. So we first consider those tactics which are least likely to have negative impacts on the environment and on the community. Usually those are non-chemical tactics. So I talked about preventive tactics. Those are usually cultural, so in rice farming, they flood the field for a certain period of time to kill weed seeds. That's a cultural tactic, all right? We may employ physical or mechanical tactics. If you have tomato hornworms, you can pick them off and feed them to your chickens, right? So I guess that's a combination of physical and biological. So it's a non-chemical tactic. We're still escalating force. Now, we also may have biological tactics. Our best biological control measures are already here, all right? They're already naturally occurring, and all we need to do is encourage them to be present in our environment. Most of our natural enemies of insect pests can be encouraged by providing floral resources, nectar and pollen, and by avoiding broad-spectrum insecticides. So you do those two things, you're going to have a lot of naturally occurring natural enemies that will help you manage insect pests. But if these tactics are not working, we need to escalate force. And the reason is because the goal is to maintain pests below unacceptable levels. If we haven't accomplished that here, we need to progress. And so chemical tactics are pesticides. All right, we've got all kinds of different pesticides. We have biological pesticides, what we call biochemical. And many of these are fungi or bacteria that are applied against specific pests. We may have reduced risk pesticides, so these may include oils, soaps, organic materials. There's lots of organic pesticides. Folks think about organic as not employing pesticides. Well, there are lots and lots of pesticides that are registered for use in organic systems and are widely used. And then hopefully we don't have to go all the way down to this final tactic, which is a broad spectrum pesticide, which usually is going to have negative impacts on the environment because it's broad spectrum. Pesticides kill things. That's what they do. That's what they're designed to do. You want it to be as specific, narrow of a spectrum as possible so that you're not wiping out other organisms that are actually there either helping you or perhaps neutral in your system. So what is a pesticide? Does anyone have an idea, a definition they'd like to offer? Some kind of poison was one idea. Another idea? Okay, so she's breaking it down linguistically, which I think is a proper way to do it. This young lady has suggested that pesticide means we're using it to kill a pest. Actually, if you look up the definition of pesticide, the EPA, our Environmental Protection Agency, has a very clear-cut definition. It states a pesticide is any substance or mixture of substances intended to kill, manage, repel, mitigate a pest. So then you realize that definition depends on another definition. What is a pest? Now, you guys have probably talked about a weed being a plant that's out of place, right? A pest is any organism that exists where it's not wanted. So if you think about these two definitions, you will realize pesticides are everywhere. As I mentioned, we have organic materials. We have home remedies. We have all of these materials that we consider to be reduced risk. They are pesticides by definition. There's one pesticide that most of us probably used this morning within our mouths. Can you guys think about what it is? Toothpaste. So the microorganisms in your mouth are pests. They cause tooth decay. In order to kill those pests, we apply fluoride and other substances to kill them. That's a pesticide application. I'm just explaining this to kind of put it into perspective, because a lot of times people use the word pesticide in a very one-sided or narrow-minded way, when actually there are all kinds of pesticides. And as I mentioned, some are reduced risk and should be considered first before our broad-spectrum pesticide options. Any questions, comments, discussion about these concepts? You didn't know you made a pesticide application this morning, did you? Okay, now, these materials that we're using, they do have labels. If you use bleach at home, bleach is a pesticide. It has a label. It's registered by the Environmental Protection Agency as a pesticide. If we're going to use these materials, we need to realize these are materials designed to kill things. That's what they do. And we need to learn how to use them safely and effectively. The number one way to learn those things is to read the label. The label is basically federal law that's been captured in very small text for you to learn. It includes information such as the EPA registration number. So bleach has an EPA registration number. Okay, you can look that number up and learn about the history of that active ingredient in our society. It includes words which try to convey the relative risk associated with this material. Caution, warning, danger. These are escalating force terms. Danger being the riskiest material, caution being reduced risk in nature. They also tell you about the personal protective equipment that is suggested for you to use by the manufacturer, okay? And so as a resident, you're not a professional, you're not required to do this, but if you're concerned about health and safety, I think it's important. Most of the time it's gloves and eye protection. but I think that when we purchase something off the shelf, we have a conception that it's a safe material. Pesticides are not safe by definition. They're designed to kill. That's what they do. Yeah, so the gentleman has suggested we talk about, there's a government document called the Material Safety Data Sheet, MSDS. Every active ingredient that is associated with an EPA registration number has this document freely available. And what it does is it tries to convey the relative health and safety risks associated with an active ingredient. So if you ever purchase a pesticidal product and you really want to know what are the risks associated with this, the label's only going to tell you so much. To really get that information, including results of lab studies that were done using that active ingredient, you can look up the Material Safety Data Sheet, MSDS, and that information is freely available. I think it's also important that we learn about proper rates and proper disposal practices for these materials. As I mentioned, it's easy to point your finger at the professional, but that professional is reporting their use and they are disposing of the materials in the proper way, okay? Lots of folks dispose of pesticides the wrong way. We have a hazardous materials program in this county that will accept your old products and recycle them the right way. You never want to discard unused pesticide in any water system, drains. Really the only legal way to get rid of, there's only two legal ways to get rid of that material. You either mix it up and apply it, or you have to turn it into the hazmat program in your county. Yes, sir.
We have a household hazardous waste facility right here, so bring your stuff.
Okay, where's that facility located? Right here. Okay. The 500 feet over there. So that's one of the only two legal ways to dispose of unused pesticide. Okay. We'll move on. I'll get off of my soapbox a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to think about this process of IPM and talk about some specific pests that you may encounter in autumn. And that's probably more interesting to you guys than the lecture about pesticides and IPM. So we're going to talk about one household pest, one garden pest, and one home orchard pest. Okay? And these are pests which are more common in autumn than other times of the year. It's important to realize that pests have annual cycles, just like plants do and just like some people do, So it's important to really be prepared and know about which pests you may encounter in which seasons. Okay. I guess I could use this paper for sheet mulching, couldn't I? All right. Okay, so let's talk about ant invasions. So this time of the year, this is a very common household pest issue. We have outdoor ant species that come inside for two reasons, and both are happening right now. One is they're looking for water and moderate temperatures. The other is when we do have our first sizable rain event, some of the nests will get flooded. And those outdoor ant species are going to look for ways to get out of that wet condition, all right? So remember the process of IPM, it starts with education. If you have an ant problem and you say, hey, Andrew, I have ants in my kitchen, what do I do? Well, the first thing I'm going to tell you is I'm going to ask you, what species of ant do you have? You probably won't know. But the reason I'm asking is because we have, most of our species are outdoor residents that move in, but we also have a few species that can actually live indoors. So we have outdoor invaders and indoor residents. As you can imagine, the management programs for these two broad groups are very different, okay? But let's move forward, assuming that we're talking about the most common species in this area. That's the Argentine ant, and that's the species that 95% of our ant complaints are based on. That's an outdoor species. So almost always the nest is located outside, and those ants have gained entry to your home through structural defects, all right? So then we want to follow the process of IPM. That's our education. How do we prevent that from being a problem in the first place? One way is via structural exclusion. So homes have lots of cracks and crevices. It's our job as homeowners or residents of that structure to try to seal those up over time. If you don't provide access for ants to breach that structural envelope, then you won't have problems indoors. It's easier said than done. But I'm talking about door sweeps. I'm talking about sealants, such as caulks and silicone-based sealants. All right? That will actually get you pretty far. You can do that on the outside as well as on the inside of your home. Okay? So I had an ant problem a couple weeks ago, actually. And the ants were living, well, they weren't living, but they were moving through the void space behind the kitchen sink. And coming out where the fixture was, there was a gap. And so all I did was I got some silicone-based caulking, and I sealed that up, and I haven't seen any ants. I didn't need to use any kind of chemical tactic, all right? First, I looked outside to see if I could locate the nest outside. I saw a place where there were ants moving inside, and I sealed that hole up as well. So that kind of structural exclusion can really get you a long way when you're talking about ant invasion. The next step in IPM is monitoring. Well, ants make it real easy. They make a trail for you. They show you where they've been, where they're going. So if you do have an ant invasion in your home, rather than the knee-jerk reaction to try to wipe all those ants into oblivion, look and see what they're doing. Where did they come from? Where are they going? And then you can follow these exclusion tactics that I've talked about up here. What about thresholds? Now, this is really dependent on your personal feeling. How many ants do you want in your kitchen? You know, perhaps it's 0. So in that case, the threshold is 1. You see 1 ant, you should really find out what's going on and take steps to either prevent or mitigate that situation. So let's say our threshold has been reached, whether it's 1 ant or 100 ants. We need to take action. Now, we talked about these non-chemical tactics, which are very effective, but let's say we've done all we can to try to exclude ants and they're still getting in. We next can think about chemical tactics, beginning with those tactics that pose the least risk to our community, which in this case is our household, and the environment, which is our immediate property or residence. So ants are social animals. They share their food with one another, and because of that, baits can be very effective. So baits are foods that are mixed with slow-acting toxicants. And the way they work is the ants visit these, they share them with their nestmates, and you can actually eliminate entire colonies with this type of approach, and the active ingredient never moves outside of that bait station except for in the body of an ant. Now, contrast this with what I call perimeter protection insecticide application, which is actually very common. A lot of folks hire contractors to make an application of insecticide around the perimeter of their home. And so that type of approach, not only does it pose problems for our urban surface waters, as I discussed before, but it doesn't knock out an entire ant colony. It only kills the ants that cross that barrier. It also won't prevent ants from coming inside. All it's going to do is kill them sometimes after they've already made their way inside. All right? So there are all kinds of problems with that approach. I think it's an outdated approach, and I'm working with the pest management industry to develop better tactics that are better for our communities and the environment. You can learn more about all of this stuff on the website. I'll give you the address at the end of the presentation here. What about do-it-yourself? You know, some people, they see ants, they want to go buy an aerosol spray and spray that on the counter. That's where you prepare your food, you know, so perhaps that's not the best approach to, you know, broadcast a poison all over your food preparation area. If you want to do something yourself, I suggest soap and water to wipe up the ants as well as to degrade their chemical trail. So they use a pheromone to let each other know where they're going, where they've been. Soap and water will denature those pheromones and help to, you know, really confuse the ants and slow them down. Then I suggest you go back up here and see what you can do with structural exclusion. All right? There are some bait approaches that are available to you. There are also professionals that specialize in this kind of a program. Okay, moving on. Any questions about ants before we go on? Yes, ma'am. Yeah. So the question is about bait stations used outdoors, and specifically we're talking about boric acid-based baits, which are very common. They use them in a liquid matrix. It's a sugar, it's usually sucrose matrix, and then there's a borate mixed with that. The question is about predators, and specifically she asked about lizards that may eat the ants. Borate is a stomach poison, and it's not good for anything to really ingest that material. I haven't done any kind of non-target studies with lizards. I'm not sure, but in theory, it's not going to be good for lizards to eat intoxicated ants. There are other bait active ingredients that are insecticides rather than stomach poisons. You know, borate is organic. Borate's organic, but it's a stomach poison that affects every organism on the planet. So you really have to weigh the options. Those borate baits do work very well, however. Yeah, I don't know. Another question? Yeah. Diatomaceous earth is another natural ingredient that can be used for a variety of crawling insects. Cockroaches, ants, bedbugs, carpet beetle nymphs, or larvae. And the way it works is it breaks down the wax on the cuticle of an insect. They have to walk through it. Diatomaceous earth is very effective, but most people use it in the wrong way. So it should be introduced into void spaces as a dust, as a fine dust. You don't ever want to put down a line of that stuff, and it's because if it gets stirred up and you breathe it, it's a pretty potent respiratory irritant. So the way it's used is in void spaces where it stays dry, and if it stays dry, it's effective for years and years and years. Any insect that gets into that void space and gets that coating on their body will slowly desiccate. Yeah, outdoors it doesn't work very well because it doesn't stay dry, and it works best in void spaces. But that can be used against ants for sure. Okay, what about snails and slugs, the mucousy marauders? So we're moving into autumn, and hopefully we'll be getting some rain soon. And you will start having problems with snails and slugs once we have more available moisture. Right now, most snails and slugs are in a state of quiescence. You know, we won't call it hibernation. It's kind of quiescence where they're waiting for moisture. So, you know, actually in my front yard, I recently did a bunch of pruning of perennials and ground covers, and you see all of these large land snails that are underneath stones, containers, and they're not moving around eating right now. They're just kind of huddled up in their shell trying to conserve water. All right? Well, I picked those off and I threw them in the street, actually. But as soon as we get some rain, they're going to start moving around, and they're going to be moving to succulent vegetables that you may be planting in your fall, winter garden, or even to some of the perennials which have been there all summer. They're all of a sudden going to be attacked by snails and slugs. So what do we do about it? Short bit of education. Snails and slugs are mollusks. As such, most of them are hermaphrodites. They can either switch between male and female sex, or some species even have both sexes. So that's your little educational tidbit about mollusks. Share that with your children. What can we do about prevention? Remember I mentioned that after we have a little bit of education about these pests, learn about their life cycle, learn that they're waiting for water, how can we prevent them from being a pest in the first place? Well, snails and slugs are easy. Well, I shouldn't say easy, but we can do some great management just using water management tactics. So if we have drip irrigation that's covered by mulch, we're going to have a lot less water available for those snails and slugs than if we have sprinkler irrigation, for instance. All right? If you have an area that is leaky, perhaps you have a hose bib or a valve for your irrigation system that's leaky, that's going to provide a habitat for snails and slugs. All right? Really just think about how you're introducing water to the landscape, how long that water sticks around, and ways that we can minimize that water. How about monitoring? Well, snails are typically going to be nocturnal, and so if you really want to see them in action, you're going to have to go out at dusk. That's the best time. You know, maybe 8 or 9 p.m. walking around with a flashlight, you'll be able to see the snails doing their action. How about in the morning? Do you ever see signs of snails when you go out in the morning? What do those look like? Mucus trails. So even if you don't want to go out into your landscape or garden at night to see the snails in action, you can go in the morning and you can see where they've been. Where did they go? That helps you sometimes know where do they hide during the day. Because during the day, they're going to seek out a sheltered place to hide out from the sun and get ready for another night of mucusy marauding. So if you can find their hiding spot, you can remove them by hand. I'll get into that in a second. Or you can look for ways to reduce the water in those hiding spots and make them less hospitable for snails and slugs. What about traps? There are lots of different traps you can make. You know, there's the classic beer trap. It also works very well for earwigs, which are considered pests by some. You can make your own trap also out of, I've seen what works really good is a melon rind. So if you like eating cantaloupe or honeydew, after you've eaten all the flesh, if you hollow out that rind so it's a semi-sphere, it's hemispherical, you can put that upside down in the garden. So upside down, I mean the moist parts on the bottom and the outside of the rinds on top. Snails and slugs will travel to that and rest there during the day. You can periodically pick up that rind and compost it, you know, crushing the snails and slugs, hopefully. Or you can remove them, put them in soapy water, feed them to the chickens, and then put the rind back. It's a great trap. You can also make these out of wood. So if you have a piece of flat wood and then you put maybe some 1/2-inch or 1-inch risers on that piece of wood, put that out in the garden. That serves as a nice moist hideaway for the snails and slugs during the day. Likewise, you can go and you can shake that off into a bucket of soapy water or take it to your chickens, and you can do that on a regular basis. It works very well. Hand picking. Let's say you're making a phone call and it's 8:30, it's dark, it's moist. While you're making your phone call, grab a flashlight, and while you're on the phone, you can be picking snails and slugs. Put them in a container, take them to your chickens. Okay, what about resistant, tolerant plants? You know, we definitely know that some plants are beacons for snail and slug activity, and others don't seem to get touched at all. If we can make choices about what we put in our garden, then maybe we can choose the plants that are either tolerant or perhaps not palatable to snails and slugs. That's not always possible, depending on what we're trying to grow. But if you visit the IPM website, we do have a list of different plants which are considered unpalatable to snails and slugs. Now, snails and slugs also can be managed using baits. There's a relatively new bait on the market. Relatively new, I think it's like 7 or 8 years old now. But this is an organic material, iron phosphate. And as it breaks down, it actually provides nutrients to the plants that you're growing. But this is a really effective snail and slug bait, and it should always be considered as an alternative to the older active ingredient, which actually is no longer available in a lot of different retail environments. But if you go certain places, you can find it. Metaldehyde, they used to sell it as a blue pellet. This material is very toxic to invertebrates and vertebrates alike. We had pet poisonings, you know, all kinds of inadvertent poisonings when folks were using this bait. If you are considering a snail bait, please don't use this one if you have pets or any other wildlife or non-target impacts that you'd like to minimize there. Questions about snails and slugs before I move on? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so they're both mollusks. Snails have a shell, and so slugs are naked, so they don't have a shell. We have a lot of different species of both, and they both cause the same kind of damage. They have a rasping mouth part that removes layers of tissue. Some of them can even remove tissue from bark of trees. You know, their mouth parts are that strong. That's the main the working difference between snails and slugs. Didn't grow the shell yet. No, they're different species, and I think they may even be different families of mollusks. Yeah. No, maggots are larvae of flies. Those are insects. Well, maggots depend on a food source, so you'd have to identify the food source. It's either going to be garbage, compost, dead animals, and the only way to manage them is to remove that food source. Yes, ma'am. Question? Yes, sir. If you can minimize the water that's available on top of the ground, you'll minimize snail and slug activity. I guess what you're saying is if you have straw on top of a drip line, it can create a habitat. Yeah, that may be, and maybe you'd have to separate that straw with a layer of, cardboard or something else, or it would have to be deep enough mulch where you don't have that water wicking up as much. But at any rate, I think that drip irrigation provides less available water than if you're using a sprinkler irrigation system. But yeah, if you're inputting water, you're going to attract snails and slugs. That's just the way it is. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so one more specific example. This one has to do with the home orchard. How many people grow citrus trees? Most of us. It's a very common part of our dooryard, backyard. And we have a pest that's relatively new to the Bay Area called the citrus leaf miner. It only attacks new growth, and it's very worrisome to folks who have never seen it before. This is a small moth, and by small I mean, less than a centimeter. It flies around, it lays its eggs on the new growth of citrus, and depending on your water and fertilization scheme, you may have new growth in the spring as well as the fall, all right? And the little caterpillars that hatch out of these eggs, remember it's a moth, so it has caterpillar larvae, they will burrow into the new growth and mine the tissue between the two cuticle layers of the leaf. And so what that does is it distorts the new growth. It can actually cause a little bit of tip dieback if it's really severe. How many people know what I'm talking about? All right. Okay, I was worried that you guys didn't know what I was talking about. It's a very common pest in the Bay Area right now. Yes, sir. So as it mines, it will distort the growth, and it can lead to curling, twisting. You look at it from a distance and say, what's wrong with my new growth? All right. Now, before I move on to thresholds, where I'm going to go more into detail here, I'd like to say that citrus leaf miner is largely a cosmetic pest. If you have a mature tree, it will not affect your yield. All right. We also have a number of natural enemies, parasitoids mainly, tiny little wasps that will parasitize the caterpillars inside the leaf. They actually will sting the leaf with their ovipositor, lay an egg inside that caterpillar, and digest it from the inside out. And if we're able to leave the leaf miners alone on a mature tree, you're going to support that whole ecosystem, and it's not going to affect your yield. However, if you're training a young tree, less than 5 years old, in the ground less than 5 years, especially if you're training for structure, this may be a pest that you need to manage because it can definitely distort new growth and it can change the way that you're going to train that tree, if that's important to you. Now, prevention can be done via nutrient management, okay? So we talked about nitrogen as being a nutrient that's lacking in our soils. Well, nitrogen can also stimulate flush of tender new growth. That's the only part of the citrus tree that the leaf miner can eat. So you have to be real careful when you're fertilizing citrus not to provide too much nitrogen, because what will happen is you'll produce a lot of new growth, which all of a sudden makes your tree very attractive to this moth to come lay eggs on. All right. How about monitoring? Now, we can look for the damage itself. That's pretty easy. But by that time, the damage has already been done. The moth has already laid eggs. The caterpillars are already eaten. So they actually make pheromone traps that will attract the male moth. So it smells like a female moth, and the male moth wants to come check it out. They'll get stuck on a sticky card that's associated with that lure, and you'll be able to know when the moths are flying around. Now that's important because it lets you know when there's pressure. It also lets you know when a contact insecticide may be effective if you're going to use a contact insecticide. If you don't know when the moths are flying around, you don't know when they're laying eggs. If you don't know when they're laying eggs, you don't know when these kinds of chemical tactics are going to be effective. What about thresholds? I mentioned that if this is a mature tree, in my opinion, there's no need to manage this pest at all. It's just kind of funny looking. It's not going to affect your yield at all. So if you have a mature citrus tree, just let it be. It's not going to affect anything. But on the other hand, if it's a younger tree, you may have some threshold. I'm not sure. That's going to depend on your situation. And you catch moths, you may decide that you need to make some kind of management decision. There are two general ways we can manage this particular pest. It's very challenging because the egg is laid on the new growth. The caterpillar hatches from that egg and right away burrows into a leaf. So the only time that it is susceptible to contact insecticides is during that short period of time when it's moving from the egg to within the leaf tissue. And that's a period of minutes. So how do we attack that? Well, we have to know when the moths are flying around. If the moths are flying around, what are they doing? Well, first they have to have sex, but yeah, then they lay eggs. Yeah, so that's what they're doing, having sex, laying eggs. Point of life, right? Meaning of life. So if you are catching moths, then you know that they're laying eggs, and that will be when you can make these contact insecticide applications and kill the little caterpillars as they move from the egg to the leaf. Now, there are organic materials that we can use here, including different oils and soaps, as well as spinosad. Spinosad is broad spectrum, but it's registered as organic in most of its formulations. If you have those little parasitoids flying around, these materials will kill them as well. So it's something to consider, whether or not it's a big enough problem for you to potentially disrupt that ecosystem. Azadirachtin, I didn't spell it all the way out. This is a component of neem. It's not the same as neem oil. All right, neem oil works primarily as a suffocant. Azadirachtin is a component that's water soluble and is actually an insect growth regulator. So if the caterpillars encounter this, they won't be able to molt properly. They'll die before they become adults. So that's another way to kind of interfere with the life cycle. Now, a lot of people, hopefully not around here, but a lot of people have been interested in systemic insecticides for this pest simply because it is so difficult to get those caterpillars in that short window of time. All right, so systemic insecticides are those that are applied to the soil, the root system. They're taken up by a plant, and they're expressed pretty much in every cell of that plant. Now, that's great if you want to manage this difficult pest, but it's not so great if you want to protect beneficial organisms in the environment, such as pollinators or such as these parasitoid wasps that I'm talking about. So yes, the insecticide will be in the leaf tissue. It will also be in the pollen. It will also be in the nectar. All right, and so these represent a tactic which is broad spectrum and has great potential to impact the environment negatively. The pheromone traps can be purchased at most home and garden stores. You can also get them online. But keep in mind, the pheromone trap does not manage the moth. It just tells you when the moth is flying. Yeah, so if you just put out a bunch of traps, all you're going to be doing is attracting a bunch of moths to your tree. Yeah. Okay, this is just a general page here, some cultural tactics that we can use in the garden. And I'm thinking of like an annual garden, like your fall garden, your spring garden, how we can manage pests. Sanitation is really important. I know we're talking about crop residues as being good for soil, and I think they are, but crop residues can also harbor pathogens as well as pests. So a lot of our leaf spot pathogens, anthracnose, lots of leaf spot pathogens overwinter on that plant debris which has fallen. So if you do have issues with those kinds of pathogens, it's a good idea to remove that plant residue before you begin your next planting cycle. Some pests will actually overwinter in that crop residue as well. Stink bugs. Who's had issues with harlequin bug or squash bug or bagrata bug? Yeah. So they overwinter in plant debris. They also overwinter in the cracks in the soil, So if you can remove that plant debris, you can remove their habitat for overwintering, you're less likely to have a huge population in late spring. Again, we talked about the advantages of crop residues. I'm talking about the disadvantages of crop residues. It's not always black and white, all right? Along the same vein, cultivation. And I know that a lot of the soil scientists were talking about the disadvantages of cultivation. If you're managing pests that overwinter in the soil, like cutworms. Who's ever dealt with cutworms in the vegetable garden? All right, so cutworms overwinter as pupae. So they go down into the soil not very far, and they pupate there. In the spring, they'll fly out as a moth and, infest your crops. If you are cultivating in late autumn, you can do one of two things. You can either drive them deeper into the soil profile if they're still mobile, and that makes it less likely they're going to emerge in the spring because they're too far down, or you can bring them to the surface where they die because it's too cold or because a predator comes along and eats them. All right, so cultivation can be very effective in late autumn for dealing with these kinds of overwintering pests in the soil profile. Again, nutrient management is a different story. I'm talking about pest management. But, there's pros and cons to everything we do in life. That's all I got for you guys. I have some contact information here. Hopefully you visited my resource table. I've got all kinds of free resources from the University of California about how we can manage pests while minimizing negative impacts on the environment and the community. You're free to contact me if you have additional questions, and I'm sorry if I took us too late in the program. Thank you.